forward and get their booster vaccination.
We now come to the Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Trust matters, and after the last fortnight, the Prime Minister's got a lot of work to do. A central plank in this government's promise to the north of England is a Crossrail of the North, with at least an entirely new high-speed rail line between Manchester and Leeds. A Crossrail for the north, an entirely new line. That is the promise. It's already been made. So I don't want the Prime Minister fobbing off the House about waiting till tomorrow. He can say today, will he stick by that promise, yes or no?
Yeah. Prime Minister.
He should wait and see what is going to be announced tomorrow, because we will produce a fantastic integrated rail plan. I'm not going to spoil it for them, Mr. Speaker. Why would I? We're going to produce a fantastic...
Order. I expect the front bench to behave better than what it is doing at the moment. If you don't want to listen to the answer, let me know now. I do, and I cannot hear when you all shout together. We want better politics. I expect better politics from both sides. Let's show a little bit more decorum than we're seeing at the moment. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when we produce our integrated rail plan tomorrow, people across the House and across the country will see what we are doing to cut journey times, to make life easier and better for people in the North East, in the North West, in the Midlands, across the whole of the north of the country. Mr. Speaker, with the biggest programme of investment in rail for a century, Mr. Speaker, for a century. And what we are doing, Mr. Speaker, is we are giving people in those communities the same access to commuter-type services that people in the southeast of this country have felt entitled to for more than a century. And that is going to be levelling up across the whole of the UK, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
Well, Mr. Speaker, that was a lot of words. But it wasn't a yes. So that's one important promise to the North that he won't stand by. Let's look at another. In February this year, the Prime Minister told this House, I can certainly confirm that we are going to develop the eastern leg as well as the whole of HS2. The whole of HS2. A new high-speed line running continuously, no gaps, between Birmingham and Leeds. So will the Prime Minister confirm that he stands by that promise?
Prime Minister.
I'm afraid the right honourable gentleman is in danger of getting hoist on his own petard, Mr. Speaker. He needs to wait and see what we announce tomorrow, because I think he will find that the people of the North East, of the North West, the people of Leeds, the people of Nottingham, the people of Sheffield, and the people of the whole of the North West and the North East of this country will benefit massively from what we are going to announce.
Keir Starmer.
Again, Mr. Speaker, a lot of words, but not a yes. So that's two important promises to the North that he won't stand by. No wonder trust in the Prime Minister is at an all-time low. Across the country and belatedly across this House, there is now agreement that Owen Paterson broke the rules and that the government should not have tried to let him off the hook. Many members opposite have apologised. The Business Secretary has apologised for his part. The Leader of the House has apologised for his part. But they were following the Prime Minister's lead. So will he do the decent thing and just say sorry for trying to give the green light to corruption?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yes, as I've said before, it certainly was a mistake to conflate the case of an individual member, no matter how sad, with the point of principle at stake, and we do need a cross-party approach on an appeals process. We also need, Mr. Speaker, a cross-party approach on the way forward, and that's why we've tabled the proposals that we have to take forward the report of the Independent Committee for Standards in Public Life of 2018 with those two key principles that everybody in this House should focus primarily and above all on their job here in this House, and secondly, that no one should exploit their position in order to advance the commercial interests of anybody else. That's our position, Mr. Speaker. We want to take forward those reforms. In the meantime, perhaps he could clear up from his proposals, whether he would continue to be able to take money as he did from Mishcon de Rea and other legal firms.
Order. Prime Minister. As you know, and I do remind you, it's Prime Minister's questions, not Leader of the Opposition's questions. Keir Starmer.
That's not an apology. Everybody else has apologised for him, but he won't apologise for himself. A coward, not a leader. Weeks defending corruption. Yesterday, a screeching last-minute U-turn to avoid defeat on Labour's plan to ban MPs from dodgy second contracts. But waving one white flag won't be enough to restore trust. And there are plenty of opposition days to come. And we will not let the Prime Minister water down the proposals or pretend that it's job done. We still haven't shut the door on the revolving door where ministers are regulating a company 1 minute and working for them the next. There are plenty of cases that still stain this House. There are 2 simple steps to sorting it out: proper independence and powers for the Business Appointments Committee and banning these job swaps. Will the Prime Minister take those steps?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've called, as you know, and indeed you have called, Mr. Speaker, for a cross-party approach to this. And what I think we need, to do is to work together on the basis of the independent report by the Committee of Standards in Public Life to take things forward and indeed to address the appeals process. But what I think everybody can see, Mr. Speaker, is that in a classic lawyerly way, the right honourable gentleman is now trying to prosecute others for exactly the course of action that he took himself. And what I think the nation wants to know, because his register is incomplete, who paid Mishcon de Rea and who paid the 25,000? Who's paying him for his...
Just a minute. Prime Minister, I don't want to fall out about it. I've made it very clear. It is Prime Minister's questions. It's not for the opposition to answer your question. Whether we like it or not, those are the rules of the game that we're all into, and we play by the rules, don't we? And we respect this House, so let's respect the House. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, that newfound commitment to upholding standards didn't last long. Mr. Speaker, here's the difference. When somebody in my party misbehaves, I kick them out.
Mr. Clark.
Where's Rob?
Mr. Clark. And I don't think... Look, this is not good. We lost a dear friend. I want to show that this House has learnt from it. I don't want each other to be shouted down. I want questions to be respected. I expect the public to actually be able to hear the questions and the answers, because I'm struggling in this chair. I need no more. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, when somebody in my party misbehaves, I kick them out. When somebody in his party misbehaves, he tries to get them off the hook. I lead, he covers up. Let's try another issue. We know that Owen Paterson was a paid lobbyist for Randox. We know that he sat in on a call between Randox and the minister responsible for handling health contracts. We know that Randox has been awarded government contracts worth almost £600 million without competition or tender. Against that backdrop, the public are concerned that taxpayers' money may have been influenced by paid lobbying. There's only one way to get to the bottom of this: a full, transparent investigation. If he votes for Labour's motion this afternoon, that investigation can start. Will he vote for it, or will he vote for another cover-up?
Prime Minister!
I'm very happy to publish all the details of the Randox contracts, which have been investigated by the National Audit Office already. We're talking of cover-ups. I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, but we still have not heard why the honourable gentleman will not tell...
Order. Minister, Prime Minister, sit down. Prime Minister, I'm not going to be challenged. You may be the Prime Minister of this country, but in this House, I'm in charge, and we're going to carry on. end of that. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, I think the Prime Minister just said he's happy to publish all the Randox papers in relation to these contracts, so we'll take that and we'll pursue it. And I remind the Prime Minister, when I was Director of Public Prosecutions, I prosecuted MPs who broke the rules. He has been investigated by every organisation he's ever been elected to. That's the difference. Billions of pounds of taxpayers' money handed to their mates and donors. Tory MPs getting rich by working as lobbyists, one not even bothering to turn up because he's in the Caribbean advising tax havens. And the Prime Minister somehow expects us to believe that he's the man to clean up Westminster. He led his troops through the sewers to cover up corruption, and he can't even say sorry. The truth is that beneath the bluster, he still thinks it's one rule for him and another for his mates. At the same time as his government are engulfed in sleaze, they're rowing back on the promises they made to the North. And it's working people who are paying the price. Is it any wonder that people are beginning to think that the joke isn't funny anymore?
Mr. Speaker, it is plain from listening to the right honourable gentleman that he seeks to criticise this government while refusing to explain his own position. And you've ruled on that, Mr. Speaker. You've ruled on that, Mr. Speaker, and I hear you. But his own misconduct, Mr. Speaker, is absolutely clear to everybody. His own misconduct is absolutely clear. And meantime, Mr. Speaker, we will get on a cross-party basis. We will get on a cross-party basis with taking forward the business that I've outlined, and we will get on with the business of this government, which is leading the country out of the pandemic.
Order. Prime Minister, I'm struggling to hear, and if it's correct what I've said, it was about Leader of the Opposition and misconduct. We cannot accuse somebody of misconduct. Now, I may, and just before the Leader of the House gives me an answer, all I'm trying to say, I cannot hear. If it was said, I want it withdrawn. If it wasn't, I will accept it. I'm just a moment. Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I referred to the right honourable gentleman's misconduct, because that is what he is guilty of. That is what he is guilty of.
Order. I don't think this has done this House any good today. I'll be quite honest. I think it's been ill-tempered. I think it shows the public that this House has not learned from the other week. I need this House to gain respect, but it starts by individuals showing respect to each other. Right, let's go to Lee, no less. We're going to James Grundy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The people of Lee have never accepted our forced merger with the friendly rivals, but rival town of Wigan back in 1973. Could the Prime Minister tell me how we could escape the big government of Big Wigan by getting our own council back?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and I thank him for his campaign against local Labour government over-taxing and delivering inadequate services. The local boundary commission will look at the boundary reviews, but meantime I will support him in any way that I can.
We now go to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, it used to always be said that the Tory MPs were behind the Prime Minister, but my goodness, look at the gaps on the third, fourth and fifth benches. Mr. Speaker, the rebellion has clearly started. Mr. Speaker, this Tory sleaze scandal has now been hitting the headline for the past 14 days. And yet, it's pretty obvious that the Prime Minister spent less than 10 minutes coming up with yesterday's half-hearted, half-baked and already half-botched proposals. These so-called reforms don't even scratch the surface. This sleaze scandal runs far, far deeper. Month after month, the public have witnessed scandal after scandal. Peerages handed to millionaire donors, VIP lanes gifted COVID contracts to Tory pals, dodgy donations for luxury holidays and home renovations. The Prime Minister and his government have been up to their necks in sleaze. Can the Prime Minister tell us exactly which one of these scandals his proposals would have stopped?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the humble crofter, as he refers to himself, for his question, and I would just say that what I think we can do is pursue a cross-party approach based on the report of the Independent Committee on Standards in Public Life, which has much of a profit in it. And it says, amongst other things, that it's important that this House should be augmented with outside experience of the world. It's important that members of this House should have experience of the private sector, as he does. And I think on a cross-party basis, we should proceed with the couple of reforms that I've indicated.
Ian Black.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Of course, this is about Tory sleaze and Tory corruption. And the Prime Minister has basically admitted that not one of this government's sleaze scandals would have been stopped by his so-called plan. And perhaps we shouldn't be surprised, considering the Prime Minister has been at the rotten core of all these scandals. The trail of sleaze and scandal all leads back to the funding of the Conservative Party. Since 2010, Mr. Speaker, the Tory Party has made nine of its former treasurers members of the House of Lords. Every single one of them has something in common. They have handed over £3 million to the Prime Minister's party. That is the very definition of corruption. It is the public's definition of corruption. Will this government finally accept that this is corruption, or is the Prime Minister the only person in the country who has the brass neck to argue that it was all one big coincidence?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I have to say that I won't comment on the missing £600,000 from the SNP's party accounts. But I do say, Mr. Speaker, in all sincerity and heeding what you've said earlier on, I think these constant attacks on the UK's levels of corruption and sleaze do a massive disservice to billions of people around the world who genuinely suffer from governments that are corrupt, who genuinely have no ability to scrutinise their MPs, Mr. Speaker. This is one of the cleanest democracies in the world, and people should be proud of it.
Simon Baines.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Would the Prime Minister join me in celebrating the 50th anniversary this year of the formation of the 177-mile path for walkers along Offord Dyke, which runs through Clwyd South, and give his support to the recently launched Offord Dyke Rescue Fund to repair and preserve this monument and nature reserve for future generations?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I've had the good fortune to walk Offord Dyke very recently, and I'm delighted that English and Welsh organisations are working together to protect that fantastic national monument, and Historic England has committed to give almost £300,000 more to that great cause.
David.
Mr. Speaker, ambulance response times are now the worst ever. People are waiting for ambulances longer than ever. And with A&Es in crisis, patients are stuck in ambulances outside hospital longer than ever. Waiting times aren't statistics, they are people. People often in great pain and in danger. So why is this government closing ambulance stations in parts of our country? Why is the West Midlands Ambulance Service closing up to 10 community ambulance stations in Rugby, Oswestry and Craven Arms? With this health crisis for our ambulance services and in our A&Es, injured, sick and elderly people are being hit. When will the Prime Minister deal with this health crisis?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I appreciate that ambulance crews and ambulance services are doing an amazing job, particularly at this time of year, and I thank them for what they're doing. We are supporting them with more cash. Another £450 million was awarded to 120 trusts to upgrade their facilities. And as he knows, we're putting another $36 billion into dealing with the backlogs, which is fundamentally affecting the NHS so badly at the moment, through the levy that we've instituted, which I don't think he supported.
Andrew Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Domestic heating accounts for 30% of UK carbon emissions, and I support the government's incentive scheme to replace the old gas boilers with environmentally friendly alternatives. But now we're building more homes than we have for many, many years. Can we build upon the success of COP26 and ask really what is the progress that is being made on the standards for new build homes to make sure that our new homes are fit for the future?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. He's totally right to focus on the issue of future-proofing homes and making them low carbon. And by 2025, our future homes standard will ensure that new homes produce at least 75% fewer CO2 emissions.
Fairness.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last week I visited a GP practice in my constituency of Sheffield, Brightside and Hillsborough and was horrified to hear about the amounts of abuse staff are currently experiencing. Their workloads are under extreme pressure, and this is not helped by the Prime Minister's demands about appointments, whilst he has still failed on his manifesto pledge to recruit 6,000 more GPs. So, will the Prime Minister apologise for this broken promise to GPs and their staff who are on the front line working under ever-increasing pressure and depleted staffing resources?
Prime Minister.
Well, first of all, I want to thank GPs for everything that they're doing, particularly during the booster rollout. But what we're also doing is not just recruiting as many GPs as we can, but we have 10,000 more nurses this year than last year, 25,000 more healthcare professionals altogether. There are more people, Mr. Speaker, now working in the NHS than at any time in its history. And because of our investment, the extra $36 billion that we're putting in, there will be even more. And I'm afraid that the lady opposite voted against that investment.
David Druid.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Following on from COP26, can my right honourable friend confirm that maximising carbon capture and storage capacity across the whole United Kingdom is a priority for this government? And, I mean, despite the doom and gloom and the words of rejection and snubbing and SNP members opposite, can he also confirm that the Acorn carbon capture and storage and hydrogen project in my constituency of Banff-and-Buchan has a key role to play in this country's future carbon capture and storage capacity targets to meet net zero?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and he's quite right to champion carbon capture and storage, which has a great future in Scotland, in spite of all the gloom stirring of the party opposite. The Scottish cluster remains on the reserve, and we will continue to study it, and we hope to bring it forward in due time.
Murray Glendon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The River Tyne, with its world-renowned offshore and subsea sectors, has been repeatedly sidelined by this government, despite me and others constantly lobbying ministers for investment that would massively increase employment opportunities and help the UK's transition to net zero. However, Mr. Speaker, I'm very excited to see our voice is now being magnified by a new Tyne task force set up by the local authorities, the port, businesses and the combined authority. So will the Prime Minister, here and now, commit his government to work with us to realise the full potential of our great river?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable lady for her question, and she's absolutely right that the River Tyne is a massive economic asset for the whole of the North East. It has suffered from historic contamination, but we're going to work with the North East Local Enterprise Partnership to invest another £6 million to help develop clear plans for sustainable economic growth along the whole of the estuary.
Henry Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Crawley constituency was one of the most negatively affected by the COVID-19 pandemic, but thanks to significant support from this government, we are seeing recovery, unemployment now beginning to come down, and we look to a confident future. In that vein, will my right honourable friend please look favourably on Crawley's Platinum Jubilee city status bid?
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend. I wasn't aware until today that Crawley was bidding to become a city, but I will look at it. I will look at it very carefully, Mr. Speaker, and I'm sure there is an excellent case in there somewhere.
David Linden.
Thank you. Speaker, every year 100,000 babies are born premature or sick in the UK and admitted to neonatal intensive care units. The Prime Minister will be aware that today is World Prematurity Day. Now, there's cross-party agreement in this House to bring forward neonatal leave and pay. So rather than wait for a complex, controversial employment bill, will the Prime Minister bring alongside a standalone bill to legislate for this so that next World Prematurity Day the 100,000 babies and their parents don't have to choose between spending time in the hospital or unpaid leave from work?
I thank the honourable gentleman. I know he's a passionate campaigner in this area, and one way or another, and I'll get back to him on the exact way, Mr. Speaker, we will legislate to allow parents of children in neonatal care to take extended leave, giving them more time during the most vulnerable and stressful days of their lives.
Chris Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further education colleges like Hotwood Hall in my Hayward and Middleton constituency will play an essential part in building back better. The team at Hotwood have supported over 8,000 learners on courses as diverse as small business management and animal management, as well as 6 new T-level courses. So, can I invite my right honourable friend to come and visit the inspirational team and the students at Hotwood Hall, and as a special treat, come and see Middleton's very own flamboyants and flamingos and our endangered potoroos?
Prime Minister.
I thank him for his kind invitation. I'll certainly keep it in mind, and the government is absolutely committed to reforming technical education through new T-levels, and that's why we're investing a further £65 million to develop teacher retention and support and recruitment for teachers in FE. As for the potoroos in his area, I will bear that. Are they wild, Mrs. Speaker? I will do my utmost to come and inspect them.
Rebecca Longbelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituent Laura told me that Remembrance Sunday hurts. It hurts because there have been no medals for her granddad's service and the thousands of men involved in nuclear weapons tests overseas between 1952 and 1991. It hurts because studies of such veterans have shown increased miscarriages, increased birth defects, and the same rate of genetic damage as clean-up workers at Chernobyl. And it hurts because the UK is the only nuclear power on Earth who has denied recognition. So I ask the Prime Minister, will he recognise nuclear testing veterans today and agree to meet them? The Leader of the Opposition has.
Prime Minister.
I'm grateful for bringing this to my attention, and I will certainly make sure that we get a proper meeting with representatives of the nuclear veterans that she raises.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I was in Greece with Save the Children, I learnt that change at any border was quickly communicated down the line. If migrants and asylum seekers knew that they would be directly returned to France or taken to a third country pending application, if they knew this, would they risk a dangerous and illegal crossing and make their way to France in the first place? Can I ask my right honourable friend what further measures are being considered? Because this is an issue of great concern in Eastbourne, along the coast, along the country, and I'm anxious to be able to reassure my constituents that there are plans ahead.
Prime Minister.
I thank her very much, and she has much relevant experience in her work for Save the Children in Greece. Our only credible way of fixing this, Mr. Speaker, is with our new plan for immigration, and that will be made possible with our new Nationality and Borders Bill, which will make it possible for us to distinguish at last between those who come here legally and those who come here illegally, Mr. Speaker. And I hope very much that it will command the support of the whole House.
Kingsbury.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In May, part of Northwich Station in my constituency collapsed. I've asked the Transport Secretary to intervene and build back better and fairer to allow access for people with disabilities. He's declined my kind offer. I'll ask the Prime Minister to intervene. No bluster, substance, build back better and fairer, Northwich Station, it's in the north of England.
Thank you. Prime Minister.
Well, I'm tempted to invite the honourable gentleman to wait and see what we do for rail funding tomorrow, but I will certainly look at what he has to say about Northwich Station with keen interest.
Sarah Atherton.
Over 4,200 servicewomen and veterans use a democratic process to contribute to the Defence Select Committee's inquiry into women in the armed forces. A formal response is still awaited from the MOD. Now, whilst the majority of women enjoy a fulfilling career in the military, shocking issues were raised around sexual assault, bullying and harassment. Yeah. I know the Prime Minister agrees with me that our armed forces are the best in the world. Would he also agree with me that we need to make sure the British Army is the best place to serve as a woman?
Prime Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, and she's campaigning on a very, very important issue. I think too often we find that our armed forces fail to provide the wonderful women in our armed forces with the support that they deserve, and that's why I'm pleased that my honourable friend, the Defence Secretary, has secured a parliamentary inquiry into this for the first time, and it's vital that we support and encourage women in our armed forces who make a massive difference to those services.
Paisley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has cost businesses in Northern Ireland the £850 million to date to operate the failed and suffocating protocol. Lord Frost is today in Belfast. When will the Prime Minister fix this by legitimately activating Article 16?
Prime Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman, and I think the word I would fasten on in his question is legitimately. And there is no question that the use of Article 16, which after all has been done by the EU Commission to stop vaccines being exported to this country, is something that is perfectly legal and within the bounds of the protocol.
Jane Hunt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I recently visited Humphrey Perkins School in beautiful Barrow-upon-Soar. The students asked me there, what is the government doing to engage children and students from all backgrounds to encourage them to aspire to become an MP and even the Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
I think what I would say to my honourable friend and her students is that nothing that is said or that takes place in this House, none of the argy-bargy, the repartee, the occasional abuse to which we subject each other, Mr. Speaker, should in any way deter anybody from seeking a career in politics, because it is a wonderful privilege, and we are all, Mr. Speaker, very lucky to be here.
Sting Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In my constituency of Edinburgh West, we are now finding numerous people coming to us with delays from DWP in pensions and benefits, to add to the delays that others are facing over passports and DVLA. Can the Prime Minister tell us, please, amongst the many jobs being done at the moment, who is making sure that the departments of government are running smoothly and quickly?
Prime Minister.
I thank her, and I think actually that the Department for Work and Pensions under my right honourable friend the Secretary of State has been a government that has performed outstanding service, performed miracles, and amongst the things that it has achieved, Mr. Speaker, is to help to get millions of people effectively back into employment in spite of all the difficulties that we have faced. We now have unemployment running at virtually record lows in spite of all the difficulties we faced in this pandemic as we come out of furlough, and that is largely thanks to the work of the DWP. Of course, there is more that can be done, and people can always up their game, Mr. Speaker, but I think that the DWP, the officials working in the DWP across the country, huge numbers of men and women, have done an outstanding job.
Final question, Jake Murray.
Mr. Speaker, in July 2019, I was in Manchester when the Prime Minister committed to build a new line, Northern Powerhouse Rail, between Manchester and Leeds. It was a commitment reaffirmed in our manifesto in November 2019 and last month reaffirmed in the Prime Minister's conference speech in Manchester. Were the voters of the North right to take the Prime Minister at his word?
Prime Minister.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, and they should wait and see what is unveiled tomorrow, where, Mr. Speaker, he may learn something to his advantage.
A point of order, Michael Fabricant.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I've just
received on the wires that the Leader of the Opposition, and I didn't hear this at the time because of so much noise, called the Prime Minister a coward. Surely that is in breach of Erskine May and improper and should be withdrawn.
Can I say there was a lot of language that I couldn't hear today, and I certainly don't want words. Coward is not what is used in this House, and I'm sure that Leader of the Opposition would withdraw.
I withdraw it. But he's no leader.
Tim Farron, point up. Pushing it today, come on.
Mr. Speaker, alongside the honourable members for Bermondsey and Old Southwark and for Ruislip, Northwood and Pinner and our friend in the other place, the Bishop of Durham, we've been pressing ministers in the Home Office to permit a cross-party visit to the Napier Barracks. On September the 7th, the Minister for Future Borders and Immigration declined our request for an in-person visit, and indeed the Home Affairs Select Committee were also refused a visit in July. On October 27th, we again requested an on-site visit and asked the Minister to respond by November the 10th. We have still yet to hear anything. Despite the Independent Chief Inspector of Borders and Immigration and Her Majesty's Inspectorate of Prisons finding earlier this year serious concerns and failings in the provision of accommodation at Napier Barracks, the Government has extended the use of Napier Barracks to 2025 and stated the site will be used to pilot design of future accommodation for asylum seekers. So you can see, Mr. Speaker, that a visit is now more than pressing. Could you advise me, Mr. Speaker, whether it is in order for the Government to refuse access to this important site to Members of Parliament?
Can I first of all say I'm grateful to the honourable member for giving notice of points of order. It is for the Government to decide whether to invite members to visit the barracks. That said, the use of the barracks has been a matter of public concern and debate, and of course I would always encourage the Government to agree to such requests from honourable and right honourable members, not least to ensure that they are able to hold the Government to account in a well-informed manner. I accept that there are occasions where it is legitimate for the Government to refuse a request for a visit, for example, on security grounds, and I should stress that I do not know any reason for refusal in this case. However, the Government benches will have heard my view that, in principle, I would hope that such requests for visits can be accommodated, and at the very least, I hope that Home Office ministers will discuss the matter properly with the honourable gentleman, and I hope that that doesn't take too long to contact him. Point of order, Martin Docherty Hughes.
Grateful, Mr. Speaker. I had no intention to take a point of order until I heard the Prime Minister's answer to my honourable friend, the member for Wrexham, in relation to their chairing the subcommittee on women in the armed forces. The Prime Minister indicated a parliamentary inquiry, I think, based on that report. Given that we've seen a tenfold increase in the reporting of rape and sexual assault of women under the age of 18 in the armed forces, can you advise the House why the Government and the Prime Minister today making a statement not meeting the demands of my right honourable friend, the member for Wrexham, and also implementing the Wigston review?
What I would say is, it's a continuation of a question earlier. What I would say is we do take seriously the point that's been made. What I would say is the member concerned, the member for Wrexham, if she feels that she needs a statement or an UQ could possibly be an answer to her wishes to continue it, I'm sure that it could be looked favourable upon. Right, no further points of orders. We now go, well, it's very quiet. I now go to the presentation of the bill. Angus Brendan McNeill.
Thank you.
Thought you'd got that.
Sorry. Peerage nominations, disqualification of party donors bill.
Second reading what day?
Friday the 26th of November.
Friday the 26th of November. Thanks, Angus. Thanks a lot. We now come to the 10-minute rule motion, disposable barbecues. I now call Robert Lager.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that leave be given to bring in a bill to prohibit the use of disposable barbecues on open moorland, to give local authorities the power to regulate the sale of disposable barbecues in their area and for connected purposes. This year alone, at least 2 wildfires have been caused by disposable barbecues in High Peak.
destroying hectares of farmland and environmentally significant peatland. In 2019, a fire in Marsden Moor, near Huddersfield, raged for 4 days and damaged over 700 hectares of moorland. A similar fire in April 2021 caused an estimated £200,000 worth of damage. In addition to this crude financial cost lies an environmental one. This is damage that will take hundreds, if not thousands of years to repair, with peat accumulating at a rate of around just 1 millimetre per year. Distressed sheep farmers have also conveyed to me the pain that they have experienced being forced to clear up the charred remains of their own livestock. Mr. Speaker, every year from the spring to the summer, communities across the country live in fear of wildfires that are entirely avoidable. A local gamekeeper once told me that there are 3 main causes of wildfires: men, women and children. But more specifically, a large number of fires are caused simply by people not disposing of their barbecue properly, leaving it unattended on the ground where its residual heat or a stray spark are enough to start a fire. Mr. Speaker, the aims of this bill are simple: to reduce the risk of wildfire and protect our beautiful countryside, to protect local communities faced with the threat of wildfires, to protect hard-pressed farmers' livelihoods, and to protect carbon-capturing peatland, which is so vital in our fight back against climate change. And this last point is particularly important, especially given the recent climate change agreement in Glasgow. The Glasgow Agreement is an important step forward. 65 countries have committed to phasing out the use of coal power. Some of the world's largest car manufacturers have agreed to make all new car sales zero emission by 2040, and the leaders of 90% of the world's forests have pledged to end deforestation by 2030. But alongside vital international cooperation, let's not forget the importance of nature-based solutions to climate change. Peatland restoration is an essential part of this. Wet, healthy peat soils absorb and trap carbon dioxide. Worldwide, it is estimated that peatland contains more than 550 gigatons of carbon. That's more than stored in all of the world's forests put together. In regulating the flow of groundwater, restoring peatland also reduces the risks of flooding, improves water quality, and enhances biodiversity. Since being elected, I have actively campaigned for the restoration of our local peat moors. I used my very first question in this House on this subject, and I'm proud to have secured a significant increase in funding for this vital work. I wholeheartedly welcome the government's England Peat Action Plan to restore, sustainably manage and protect peatland, as well as the increase in the Nature for Climate Fund to £750 million by 2024-25, with the aim of restoring 35,000 hectares of peatland across England. And I've seen firsthand the fantastic work that this funding makes possible. On Brown Knoll and Rushop Edge, one of the highest hills in the Peak District, Moors for the Future Partnership have been hard at work restoring peatland. And recently I took my right honourable friend, the Farming Minister, to meet Hope Valley farmers and to see the work on Brown Knoll. And I'm encouraged by the leadership the government have shown on this issue. But this work is meaningless if we are to continue to allow a reckless few to continue to destroy this precious resource by wildfire. Mr. Speaker, I didn't come into politics to tell people how to live their lives, and this bill certainly doesn't set out to do that. But as a Conservative, I firmly believe that we hold a duty to future generations, not only to conserve what we have today, but to leave them with a greater inheritance than our own. While this bill represents only a modest change to the law, it would be a mistake to overlook its significance. And the aims of this bill are not new. In fact, they build on work that a range of organisations have already undertaken. The New Forest and Peak District National Park authorities, for example, have already banned the use of disposable barbecues within their boundaries and call for local retailers to stop their sale. I've had considerable success in convincing retailers to remove them from sale within High Peak and pay tribute to responsible businesses like Morrison's who've removed them from sale in their Buxton store. The Co-op have also removed display of disposable barbecues in 130 of its stores that border national parks. The National Fire Chiefs Council, Greater Manchester Fire Service, moorland associations, Moors for the Future and the National Trust, among others, have all warned of the danger that disposable barbecues present and have called for tougher regulations of their use. This bill does just that. While the Countryside Code already sets out an expectation that visitors should only barbecue where it has been deemed safe to do so, there is no law that enforces this guidance. Without one, there is widespread confusion and ignorance, sowing the seeds for future wildfires. This bill seeks to clarify the law, banning the use of disposable barbecues on open moorland. I'm incredibly grateful to colleagues on both sides of this House for the positive cross-party support that this bill has received. I've worked hard with a range of partners to ensure that this bill is fit for purpose, and I will keep working in a bipartisan spirit to do so. I'm aware that, as a 10-minute rule bill, there is little chance of this bill progressing into law at this stage. Nonetheless, I seriously urge the Government to listen to the concerns raised in this bill and to act on disposable barbecues, as well as redoubling their efforts to promote and educate people on the Countryside Code. To prevent wildfires, to protect farmers' livelihoods, and to build up our existing defences against climate change, this bill presents a small but significant way forward. Mr. Speaker, with this in mind, I humbly request for this bill to be given due consideration and to be passed into law.
Can I first of all say personally thank him for the bill, as he knows I was affected with those severe moorland fires in my constituency. That the honourable member to have leave to bring in the bill. The question is that the honourable member have leave to bring in the bill. As many of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who will prepare to bring in the bill?
John Barron, the Right Honourable Karen Bradley, the Right Honourable Damien Green, Andrew Gwynn, Simon Hoare, Helen Hayes, Kevin Hollinrake, Simon Jupp, Jason McCartney, Munira Wilson, the Right Honourable Sammy Wilson, and myself, Mr. Speaker.
Robert Largan.
Disposable barbecues bill.
Second reading what day?
14th of January, 2022.
We're going with January 2022. Absolutely. Don't worry. Okay. We now come to the first opposition day motion on the humble address relating to the Randox COVID contracts. I call the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Angela Rayner, to move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the heart of this debate today, there are two very simple questions. Does the government have anything to hide? And will members opposite, I would say members opposite, but there isn't many members opposite to say it to, will they now vote for a clean-up or a cover-up? Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister just minutes ago said, in an answer to my right honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, I'm very happy to publish all the details of the Randox contracts. If that is the case, Mr. Speaker, then he should vote for our motion today and publish all of the documents and correspondence related to the Randox contracts and the dodgy lobbying that went on around them. Because the motion before the House is very simple. We already know that the former member for North Shropshire broke the rules on lobbying. We already know that Randox was awarded nearly £600 million of taxpayers' money without a tender. We already know that Randox were awarded a second £347 million contract, having failed to deliver on a previous £133 million contract. And we already know this decision was made after a conference call involving the then member for North Shropshire and the Health Minister, Lord Bethell. Mr. Speaker, what we don't know is what happened in those meetings. Who else was present? What was discussed? And what was decided? I'll happily give way.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My honourable friend makes a really interesting point about who was at the meeting. It isn't just a convention, it's an absolute necessity that when a minister meets with a member of parliament or indeed outside bodies, that they're accompanied by civil servants who would take a note and a record of that meeting. Can we be certain as to whether the minister was accompanied by such a civil servant who took those notes?
My honourable friend makes a very good point and has been in this House a very long time and is aware that these conventions are there and these procedures are there to ensure that process is followed and that there's records of that, and yet we know that we don't know what was said in any of the correspondence before or after, including those private email accounts or phones. We don't know why or how these contracts were awarded. I hope the Minister today can give us some insight into that. We don't know what rules might have been broken and what the role of the member for North Shropshire's lobbying played in the government's decision. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful, my friend, for giving way. We all know about the failures of the government's dodgy crony contracts, which have wasted taxpayers' money by the billion. Does my honourable friend agree with me that not only should the government come clean, but they should be getting the cash back to spend on projects like a new hospital for Stockton to help deal with the huge health inequalities we have there?
You know, my honourable friend makes a very crucial point, because I think this is why the public are so frustrated in this as well, because the suggestion and the potential waste, and we know there has been waste in some of these contracts, we know that actually that money that is so needed at the moment in many parts of our country, in many areas of our constituencies, we know that money could have been better spent, and we know the cost of not doing that properly. I'll happily give way.
I'm grateful to my honourable for giving way. And does she agree that it speaks volumes that Conservative members can't be bothered to turn up to defend the government's position? So would she agree further that actually the reason they've not turned up is because they know what they're doing is wrong and that the country deserves so much better than what the Tories are delivering for them?
You know, my honourable friend makes the point. I don't think I've ever seen the chamber on that side that empty when I'm up at the dispatch box. It's quite novel. But you know, it's not just about the respect. It's not just about the respect for this House, Mr. Speaker. It's about respect for the public that watch, that are seeing this, and that want to know the answers and want to know what members from across the House who are elected to this place, what they think. And you know, we do know that the government have refused to provide answers to the freedom of information requests on these points. And we do know that this is far from the only time that they have swerved scrutiny on their decisions. Take the mystery of Lord Bethel's mobile, for example. The House may recall that the Prime Minister's official spokesperson denied categorically that ministers ever used private accounts for government business, only for that denial to fall apart. The government has now admitted in court that Lord Bethel corresponded about public contracts via WhatsApp or text message, while searches of his three private email accounts using keywords about COVID contracts unearthed tens of thousands of messages and documents. In December last year, Lord Bethel was told his mobile phone would be searched for documents. Mr. Speaker, just weeks later, he said he had replaced that phone. First, he claimed his phone had been lost. Then he said it was broken. And then he said he'd given it away to a family member. Finally, Mr. Speaker, nearly a year on, he remembered that he had his phone all along. But unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, he was in the habit of deleting his entire WhatsApp history. And sadly, the relevant messages may have been lost. And do you know what, Mr. Speaker? He said the problem, and I'm not making this up, was exacerbated by having two phones. A personal one, as well as his official one. And I'm not kidding. That, at least, I can agree with him on. I'll happily give way, yeah.
Well, my honourable friend, join me in congratulating the Good Law Project, who started to close the net in on Lord Bethel and started to unearth all of these kind of burner, drug dealer type actions of the minister.
I thank my honourable friend for mentioning the Good Law Project, because it's absolutely right. And you know, we've seen that actually, you know, we've said over the last couple of weeks on some of the issues around sleaze and the conduct and corruption that we've seen, is actually there's many organisations, there's many people across this country, and the Prime Minister said at Prime Minister's questions about how, you know, sleaze and corruption and how that's affecting the UK. Well, I say to the Prime Minister and I say to members opposite, it's not the UK that's sleazy and corrupt, and we've seen that by the way in which the UK has responded to the sleaze and corrupt. It's this government that is sleazy and corrupt. I give way.
Right, Honourable Lady Goodman, this government, the problem is it rots from the head down. So until the Prime Minister actually gets a grip of his act, and bear in mind he's the MP who's been 3 times in front of the sleaze watchdog and had a corrupt track record as the London Mayor, then we cannot stand on a global stage and say we're not a corrupt country until he himself is cleaner than clean.
I thank my honourable friend for his intervention, because this is absolutely right, and this it goes to the nub of what the problem is. It's the Prime Minister, even today, even when asked by my honourable friend, the Leader of the Opposition, to apologise, even when his ministers and his cabinet ministers have already apologised, and members of the opposite benches won't even attend today because they're embarrassed by their government's actions, he still has refused to accept his responsibility in it. And this is why we're calling for transparency today. Frankly, yeah, I'll happily give way.
Thank the honourable friend for giving way. And while we're on the subject of the companies which were awarded contracts, I'd like the Minister to think for a moment about the companies that were not awarded contracts. Arco, in my constituency, is a company which is known as being the UK's leader in safety equipment, the leader in safety equipment. They had a warehouse full of PPE equipment that they would have been willing to give out to the NHS, but for some reason they couldn't find their way through the maze and the bureaucracy involved in giving contracts being awarded by the government, and instead we hear about these companies being awarded contracts who have no record of expertise or knowledge, and yet companies like Arco being denied. How can that be right, Mr. Speaker?
My honourable friend makes a very important point, and this is the distinction between what we've heard from other companies who, another organisation who have experience in the field, who feel like they were blocked and there wasn't a transparent process for them to go through, and yet we've seen concerns about how procurement decisions were being made for these companies and companies like Randox with a lack of any paper trail showing that they were made properly. How is that fair? So the question is very simple. What are the ministers hiding? I'll happily give way.
And isn't that the nub of the point, that the fact that ministers are using WhatsApp messages to make contracts is a way of circumventing the procurement process that is there to protect the probity of government spending, and that is why we should be challenging these things as firmly as we can.
My honourable friend makes a very good point, and probity. If they've got nothing to hide and no rules were broken, then ministers would surely be happy to publish the details of these meetings and the correspondence. But, Mr. Speaker, they have refused time and time again. So today, we've tabled this motion and we will put it to a vote, because the only logical conclusion is that there is something to hide, that the dodgy lobbying at the heart of this scandal has played a part in how vast sums of taxpayers' cash has been spent.
Will our honourable friend give way before she moves on?
Yeah, I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Thank my right honourable friend for giving way. She's making a very strong case indeed for reforming this rotten process. Does she agree with me that when this House granted that government over there the powers under emergency legislation to handle the procurement of important medical supplies, they did not expect for 1 second this orgy of procurement outrages, this feeding frenzy of money for their friends and their donors, this ransacking of public money to help their own that we have seen.
The honourable member makes a crucial point, and I say it again, and in all my time since I've been in Parliament, I've never seen the benches opposite so empty, and I will be graceful to a number of honourable members on those benches who have expressed both public and in private their concerns around this issue as well. And I urge honourable members from across the House to look at this issue, not necessarily in party political sense, but in the damage it's done. Yes, in the damage it's done. And the Prime Minister says that PMQs about the UK and sleaze and corruption. Well, the Prime Minister has brought that to the UK and has undermined, and even former Conservative Prime Ministers have raised concerns regarding the Prime Minister's conduct. So I don't want to make it too party political, because I can see from the sparseness of the benches opposite that actually I suspect many of those honourable members absolutely agree with us.
Right, honourable friend, I'm listening with interest, great interest, to the very good speech she's making. I've actually been in the House a bit longer than her. I came in 1979. Mr. Speaker, I've never seen anything like this. I think it is an honourable thing for every member to do, to champion firms in their constituency. I tried to help businesses in my constituency get audits at this time and could not get through. It wasn't a level playing field. Mr. Speaker, can I remind the Deputy Leader of my party that I have been here all this time. I have never seen this determined boycott of an important debate on an opposition day in all my years in the House.
I thank the honourable member, and I remind the honourable member that I was born in 1980, so I'm definitely going to... And I also remind the honourable member that I'm a grandma as well, and my granddaughter's 4 next week, so he has considerable more experience than this granny, so I will bow down to his better judgment on that. But you know, Mr. Speaker, it is a shame that so many are not here for this very important debate today, because it is very important. It goes to the heart of what we're here for, and people want to see that we're really taking these issues very seriously, and I think the public do have an interest in making sure that the rules and the transparency that they expect from our government is upheld. I'll have to give way.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and does she agree with me that many of our constituents are extremely angry about this, not just because there's cronyism and corruption, but worse still, because there's been a massive waste of taxpayers' money, because many of the contracts that they let for PPE didn't even result in the PPE being provided. It was substandard, and therefore it's been a massive waste of our money, and money that could have been better spent on services in our constituencies.
The member is absolutely right, which leads me to the second simple question for the House today. 2 weeks ago, the government led members opposite through the lobbies for a stitch-up and a cover-up. Many have publicly and privately expressed their regret at voting in favour of that motion. And I have no doubt their regret is sincere, Mr. Speaker, and they surely must now look with fresh eyes at those who led them through the lobbies. The Prime Minister brought shame on our democracy and on this House. That vote undermined trust in our democracy and undermined the integrity of public office. So today, I say to honourable and right honourable members opposite, learn the lesson. Don't vote for another cover-up. The first step in restoring trust is publishing these documents today. So, Mr. Speaker, taxpayers' money must be treated with respect, not handed out in backhand deals to companies and pay Conservative MPs to lobby on their behalf. And Mr. Speaker, Randox is just the tip of the iceberg in this scandal. Just yesterday, we finally found out the list of the favoured suppliers referred to, the so-called VIP lane for PPE procurement. The information that ministers have failed to release on their own accord, despite a ruling from the Information Commissioner, and that we only found out due to a leak. And no wonder, Mr Speaker, they didn't want to publish it. We already knew that those companies that got to the VIP lane were 10 times more likely to win a contract than anyone else. Many did not, as ministers have belatedly admitted, go through the so-called 8-stage process of diligence. And we now know that they got into the VIP, we now know how they got into the VIP lane in the first place. Mr Speaker, not a single one of them had been referred by a politician of any political party other than the Conservative Party. Of the 47 successful companies revealed yesterday, the original source of referral was a Conservative politician or advisor in 19 cases. The then Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, the Cabinet member who oversaw the entire emergency procurement programme, fast-tracked a bid from one of his own personal friends and donors who went on to win hundreds of millions of pounds of public money. Yeah, happy.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. My honourable friend might also reference an article by Sam Bright from Byline Times, who calls on the fact that £1 billion in contracts have been awarded to Conservative donors.
Yes. And £3.5 billion of contracts have been handed out by this government to their political donors and ministers' mates. Almost £3 billion more has been wasted on unusable PPE, which is costing British taxpayers £1 million a day just to store. So yes, we need an investigation into that too. We need an investigation into every pound and penny that has been handed out, and to learn the lessons so the public money isn't wasted again. But Mr Speaker, the question before the House today is very simple. Do we choose to clean up or to cover up? I give way to my friend.
I thank my right honourable friend for giving way. She's making a really powerful speech. One point, of course, is the contracts as they stand. The other is going forwards. Just last week, I had to get a flight back into the UK, filled in the England passenger locator form. There's a drop-down menu for the 2-day lateral flow test. There were 15 companies listed. Of those 15, 3 were Randox. I chose another. It turned out to be Randox. Is this part of a wider scam?
And I think the member, my friend, has a very important point here, and I think the general public are also asking these questions. And this is why the question is, do we clean up or cover up? Are we going to have the transparency that the public deserve and what members deserve from across the House? I know that members across this House care about our democracy. Although we disagree on many things, Mr Speaker, I hope we can agree on the importance of trust in our politics, the values of honesty and integrity in public office. Mr Speaker, a vote for our motion today is simply a vote for the truth.
Yes.
To tackle the dodgy lobbying that has brought shame on this House. The Prime Minister has created a corruption scandal that has engulfed his government and his party. And I've got to say, Mr Speaker, that voting for another cover-up today would send a very clear message to the electorate that the Prime Minister cares more about covering up dodgy lobbying than putting things right. That he cares more about his self-interest than the public interest. After the last 2 weeks, Mr Speaker, that cannot be the message that members opposite want to send. So, Mr Speaker, I say today, I hope the benches opposite are listening. Let's end the cover-up and begin the clean-up.
The question is, as on the order paper, I now call Gillian Keegan, the Minister, to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. And I am grateful to the opposition for using today to raise such an important matter. And I actually welcome the opportunity to debate it and the opportunity to introduce a few facts. Now, we have risen to meet the greatest public health challenge in a generation by working together, whether that's the NHS, government, academia, industry, the army, or indeed the British people. And we've all had our part to play. And it's meant that today we've given over 110 million life-saving vaccine doses, and now we're rolling out the booster programme. We've launched game-changing treatments like dexamethasone and Ronapreve. And of course, we have built the largest testing infrastructure in Europe with the newfound ability to test millions of people in a single day. I'm very happy to give way.
Minister for giving way. Can I ask the Minister, why didn't we use existing infrastructures that existed when we were building the system?
It's a very good question. It's one that I asked. So I think it's very important that we look at what we actually did. The equipment we had was in our universities. Some was in our NHS labs as well. But they didn't have the scale that we needed. So we all worked together. In fact, they call it the Triple Helix Partnership, which is universities, our NHS, and industry working together to build and scale up to that level of scale that we needed. If you remember at the time, there was discussion about moonshot testing, and you all laughed, as you always do, because you don't have to deliver. But we delivered it. We delivered it, and we delivered the moonshot.
A point of order, Chris Elmore.
Your guidance, the Minister keeps referring to the House as you, which I'm pretty sure you will be aware, Mr Speaker, addresses yourself, and it's not you, Mr Speaker, who's been dealing with contracts, it's the government and not opposition MPs.
Thanks for that. What I would say is I take no responsibility for the letting of these contracts, do I nor wish to. And I've got to say thank you, but I was letting it flow because in fairness the Minister is defending an impossible position. You know, in fairness, when you get a bad hand, I think at times you just got to let the best go.
I am feeling my luck, Mr Speaker. I'm very happy to give way to the Honourable Lady.
Can I just clarify, the government didn't actually deliver moonshot, number one. Number two, the £100 million were for private companies, and actually in the end that was diverted to local councils and authorities, and they were the ones that delivered the rollout of the vaccination with the help of the NHS, which is a socialist endeavour. So I would just caution the Minister to not twist the truth.
The Honourable Lady actually asked me...
Order. I'm sure no member would twist the truth, would we, Minister?
And the Honourable Lady actually asked me about testing, which is what I answered. The question was about testing. So let me just go on to say that, you know, I don't mind. I'm very happy to take an intervention from the Honourable Gentleman.
Would you accept that none of us on these benches thought anything about the wonderful team and the effort that went into finding the vaccine, developing the vaccine, all that we believe was wonderful. It's what came out in terms of the equipment contracts and the testing contracts. It can be done above board. It can be done brilliantly. It was in terms of producing a vaccine. It wasn't in the other endeavours. That is what we're trying to say today, and I know she's going to keep going on about the vaccine.
Order. The Honourable Gentleman's not being fair. As he reminded us all earlier, he came in 1979, so he knows the rules, and there's no more rule apparent than it's got to be brief, not a speech. If he wants to speak, I'm happy to put him on this list. Don't use all his words up just yet, Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I will use a few words to answer the gentleman's question. So we are in a position, the position that we're in today, because of the countless powerful partnerships that we have built. But, Mr Speaker, if we cast our minds back less than 2 years ago, we faced a much more uncertain future. SARS-CoV-2, which later became known as COVID-19, had no known treatment and no vaccine, and we had little to no ability to test for it. It was spreading throughout the world at unprecedented speed, causing unprecedented death and widespread despair. And I'm sure honourable members, when given a moment to pause and reflect, can recall just how they felt as they saw those harrowing pictures, first in Wuhan and later in the hospitals of Italy and Spain. And with that grim foreboding, this very unfamiliar virus was heading to our shores. I will give way, but I would urge honourable members that if they do want to hear some of the facts, because I have lots of them in here, I'm very, very happy to get on with the speech, but I'll give way on this occasion.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way, Mr Speaker. I know it's a terribly tough gig that she's been given, but what she doesn't seem to be answering is the point made a little bit earlier. Arco in Hull existed for 135 years. It supplied the NHS with top quality products since its very inception. They were blocked from the VIP lane. Why?
So, as I said, I would like to get on to answer some of these questions. So if the honourable members would just bear with me, let me get the speech out, and then obviously I'll give time to answer some further interventions. So it was in this context that we were operating, Mr Speaker. The fear that we would run out of vital testing equipment, the fear that we wouldn't have the capacity to test people for COVID, and the fear that as a result this deadly virus would continue to pass from person to person, overwhelm our National Health Service and cause untold devastation. And it is the duty of any responsible government to do all that they can to prevent such a grim outcome, to save lives, to protect our key workers, and to partner with as many of those people who are available with the experience and the expertise to get things done. So, Mr Speaker, we engaged with many thousands of businesses, large and small, from all over the country, from all over the world, to set out what we needed and to find out what they could do. Now, Randox has been globally recognised in the in vitro diagnostics industry for nearly 40 years. It's a British business with its roots in Northern Ireland, and it has a history of developing diagnostic solutions for hospitals, clinical settings and research labs. Even as early as March 2020, they had lab-based PCR testing capacity for COVID-19. Against the fears that we wouldn't have enough testing capacity, we worked with companies with existing diagnostic capability, and that is just plain common sense. As I said, I would like to press on. I know you're very keen to get my words, and my words are correct. This was against the fears that we would not have enough testing capacity. You must remember those days. We all knew it. We saw it on the news every single night. So we worked with the companies that had existing diagnostic capability, and that is just plain common sense. I'm not going to give way for a while till I get some facts out. If the honourable members could please bear with us. More facts. Moreover, working with Randox made sense with respect to our cross-UK efforts against COVID-19, giving us the ability to use the existing facilities in Northern Ireland for the benefit of the whole United Kingdom. So, initial contracts with Randox were procured under regulations which allow us to marshal goods and services with extreme urgency in exceptional circumstances. And these were extremely exceptional circumstances, Mr Speaker. And there is no question that Randox has played its part. The initial challenge they faced were the challenges facing governments the world over, a shortage of machinery and transport. Yet they quickly overcame them to play a critical role in our pandemic response. Now, an independent assessment, which the Honourable Lady might like to read, in June 2020 found that Randox was ahead of all other labs in terms of their process, their plans and their reporting. And so a 6-month extension was agreed in September 2020. And by March this year, Randox were actually exceeding their contract targets. I'll get the target out and then I shall let the gentleman intervene. The target that they actually exceeded, which was their contract targets, and this was mentioned by the Honourable Lady, was processing more than 120,000 tests in a single day. I'm happy to give way.
I'm grateful for the Minister for running through the dates. She may recall that the Secretary of State for Health came to this House in, I believe, July of last year to announce that 750 Randox tests had to be withdrawn that were being used in care homes because they were faulty in care homes, Mr. Speaker. Subsequent to that announcement, the government awarded a £350 million contract to Randox. Why?
Why? Because they were trying to get as many tests out as possible. As I said, they processed more than one. So to date, Randox have carried out over 15 million tests for COVID-19. Just to put into context, 15 million tests. And they've identified over 700,000 positive cases. That's 700,000 people who might otherwise have gone on to spread the disease, which, as a result of this testing capacity, received the right advice to isolate, protecting their friends and family and society at large.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I'm prepared to take at face value everything she says about Randox, but it does then raise in my mind the question what exactly benefit they had from engaging the services of Owen Paterson. And that being the case, will the Minister commit now at the dispatch box to publish the minutes of the telephone conference call of which he was part?
I can't answer that question, obviously. I think the gentleman knows that the only person who can answer that question is Randox and the gentleman that he referred to, Owen Paterson. So I don't believe the British people... I'm happy to give way again.
Just to be quite clear about this, is the Minister saying that her department does not hold minutes of that conference call? Because that, from my experience having been in government, would be a quite remarkable departure from accepted procedure.
With respect, I don't think the honourable gentleman has ever been in government during a global pandemic. But what I was answering the question was with regard to your question about the value between why somebody would employ somebody on a contract. I can't answer that. In terms of the minutes, I think we've said that we will publish things here in the library. I'll get on to that.
Order. Can I say, it's a very interesting question, and I know the Minister's been put on point with the answer, that meetings should be logged and minutes should be held of official meetings. And I would hope that it would be looked, and if you couldn't answer today, to a very serious question, because it will bring a lot of other things into question if that was the case. Now, I don't want to pay a political point, but I'm very concerned for all of us in this House about that. Sorry to interrupt, Minister, but on to point of order, Don Butler.
Mr. Speaker, can you just make it absolutely clear, I mean, I have been in government, that regardless whether we're in a pandemic or not, that ministerial meetings are, there's an agenda, there's a civil servant there, regardless if there's a pandemic. A pandemic is not an excuse for not recording minutes of meetings, Mr. Speaker.
In fact, to answer that point of order, I would have thought it's more important that you actually hold meetings on the basis we're in a pandemic, so we can refer back to. So I am very, very concerned, and I don't want to put anybody on the spot, but at some point it does need to be clarified. Minister.
When I get to that point in my speech, but I'll pull it out now so that people can hear it, that we will review what information is held that's in scope, and we will come back to the Parliament and we will deposit them in the libraries of the House. So we will commit to do that. And I would like to press on one more time. I mean that one more time.
I am genuinely very grateful. I have a lot of respect for the Minister. She should know that. The question that she may not be able to answer, but I hope she can actually say that she can't answer. She appeared to say before to the honourable member, former minister, that he hadn't been a minister during a time of national emergency, and that's true. No more was I. But can the minister be absolutely clear whether she knows that the conversation between the noble Lord Bethel and representatives of Randox was minuted by civil servants, or does she know that it was not minuted, or can she simply not say? It would be helpful for the record today, Mr. Speaker, if we had that information. Does she know?
I think, I mean, obviously the honourable gentleman knows that I personally was not there at the time, but the meeting that he refers to was a courtesy call from the Minister to Randox to discuss RNA extraction kits. That was declared on the Ministerial Register of Calls and Meetings, and we have been, I've been unable to locate a formal note of that meeting. But all the other notes that are available with regard to this, and that meeting, by the way, was after any contracts were let with Randox, which I'll get onto, which I will get onto.
Point of order, Angela Riedel.
Mr. Speaker, we've just heard the Minister saying that there are no minutes to this so-called courtesy call. Can you, Mr. Speaker, tell us what, as members of the House, we can do upon learning this through this House, given the astonishing nature of the revelation that the Minister has just made, that there have been meetings with no minutes that are official, that involve government ministers, and she is unable to locate a copy of what is clearly a meeting that happened?
Staggering. First of all, I think, and I've had said to the Minister, I think in fairness the Minister ought to be given time. I'm sure there's PPSs, and I'm sure the bench will have heard to try and answer the question if we haven't got that information. I would say, and I would expect, that government meetings that take place with people around would always be minuted. If not, I think it opens up another question, and I don't want that question to be opened up. I would sooner for it to be answered, and therefore I'm sure at some point that we will get that answer, and I think it's a fair point to be made. What I don't want to do is end up on a frenzy in front of the Minister, that she can then, hopefully, that some information will be fed back, and I'm looking to behind to see if that can be fed in at the moment. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I want to, if I could please just get some of these points out. So, of course, Mr. Speaker, there are a phenomenal set of safeguards in place. The National Audit Office has reviewed the testing contracts, and they have confirmed that all the proper contracting procedures were followed. And I quote...
I thank the Minister for giving way. Could I just request the Minister to just make clear to the House, when she has just said that there would be a review of what information is available that was within scope, what she understands as within scope?
I don't have a definition of what's within scope, but we will provide that to you. In terms of the NAO report, the NAO, and I quote, have said that the ministers had properly declared their interests, and there was no evidence of ministers' involvement in procurement decisions or contract management. The NAO has confirmed that all the proper contracting procedures were followed. Contracts with Randox, as with all government contracts, are published online, and they are there on the contract finder. And I think the honourable members will find the date of the contract precedes actually any minutes or any meetings that we're talking about. And in case the members opposite have conveniently forgotten this, ministers have no role in the evaluation of government contracts. Ministers have no role in the procurement process. Ministers have no role in the value of these contracts. Ministers have no role in the scope of these contracts. And ministers have no role in the length of these contracts. From start to finish, the procurement process is rightly carried out by commercial professionals. And I would like to say they are governed by a strict regulatory framework. And I know this because I have been a procurement manager for much of my career before coming here.
Sorry, the Minister. I've got a point of order, Dawn Butler.
Mr. Speaker, I know the Minister has been given a really hard gig today, and I'm actually beginning to feel sorry for her, because she's been given a script that is filled with inaccuracies, Mr. Speaker. The NAO report is filled with inaccuracies, Mr. Speaker, and I think it's really worrying that the minister's continuing with the script that's inaccurate.
Can I, first of all, there's a point of debate, and you wouldn't expect me to be brought into the debate. What I would say is the minister must answer it in the way, and that's for the opposition and other people then come in to actually open up some of the statements that have been made, and that's why we've got the opposition day, in which that I would expect that people will put the questions and pose the questions, and I'm sure that summing up will fill some of the voids in the questions. What I would say is I'm not responsible for what the minister says, and I certainly don't want to be, and I think it would be wrong to even consider that I should be. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And of course, we all know that everything I say will go on the record, and everything I say you can challenge, of course. And I think, and if I could just make a little bit of progress, please. I have been generous with my time. I am very happy to be here, and I am trying to answer your questions as best I can. And I do actually feel that we ought to remember, as a former procurement professional myself for many years, and I've spoken to all the procurement professionals involved in this, in preparing for today, we have to remember that they are highly trained, highly commercial, highly professional, and highly regulated. They have an independent process that ministers do not get involved with. I've only been a minister now for just under 2 years, but I can confirm that that is, if I can make some progress, I can confirm that that is the procurement process. I don't need any help in the procurement process. And I can confirm today that no exception was made for Randox. But ministers, of course, do have a role in understanding what is happening with these contracts. And we have calls, we have meetings with our commercial partners, find out what challenges they're facing, drive them to go as fast as they can, and to ensure that we're holding them to the commitments that they've made. These meetings are only natural, but they are nothing to do with the actual contracts. They are to do with the delivery. And to ensure that we are getting the commitments and holding them to account, that's only natural. But exactly what you'd expect, that we have behaved in exactly the same way you'd expect from a responsible government operating in a national crisis. Now, if I could just say, the government is not intending to vote against this humble address. We will review what information we hold in scope, and we will define the scope in answer to the Honourable Lady's question, and we'll come back to Parliament and we'll deposit them here in the libraries of the House. In line with the government's established stance on responses to humble addresses, I'm very happy to give way.
I thank the Minister, and I welcome her comments, and I hope that transparency comes forward. But can I just remind the Minister that part of the reasons why we brought this motion to the House today was that the process wasn't followed, actually, and there is questions about the process and how ministers were able to fast-track through a VIP lane.
Well, the process of the VIP lane was part of making sure we were aware of what capability companies had. At that point, they then went through a procurement process with highly trained professional procurement people who I've spoken to, who actually would be quite insulted if you thought that they had not followed all the procedures. It's their professionalism. So, what in terms of procurement, it doesn't mean, though, that we don't believe there are lessons to learn. Of course, there are lessons to learn. And you can't face such an unprecedented challenge and conclude that everything worked perfectly. Of course, that's not what we're saying either. And we do remain committed to procurement reform. We know that we are looking at coming forward with some. We're publishing our Transforming Public Procurement Green Paper last December, which provided commercial terms across government. And we clarified the roles and responsibilities of everyone involved in decision-making. And we're determined to do all we can to ensure that we have a system that is simple and less bureaucratic, and is underpinned by those enduring principles of fair and open competition.
Will the Minister give away?
I'm very happy to give way.
I thank the Minister for giving away, but would you agree with me that this is a situation that happened across the United Kingdom? Because I'm under the impression that the SNP government in Scotland gave £500 million worth of contracts without competition. So what happened in England and the UK was no different to what happened to other parts of the country. This is how everyone operates in a global pandemic.
Of course, the most important thing in a global pandemic is to secure supply. Supply of something that was not widely available across the world. The most important thing is to get security of supply, and that is what we did. And you know, we all know there was a time when we were worried about running out of PPE. We were worried about not having enough testing capacity, and we were worried about not having the large scale of supplies that we needed to meet the demand. And so, of course, any responsible government would do that. So, as I was saying, we are looking at the procurement systems. We are determined to do all we can to ensure that we have a system that is simple and less bureaucratic, but is still underpinned by those enduring principles of fair and open competition. We're also implementing the recommendations from the first and second Boardman review into improving procurement. Let me just get to the end of this point and I will give way. We're also implementing, because I'm sure the Honourable Gentleman was listening very carefully and wants to hear these words, we're also implementing the recommendations from the first and the second Boardman review into improving procurement. Mr Speaker, Madam Deputy Speaker, honourable members will be also aware that we've established an independent public inquiry which will begin work in the spring with full powers under the 2005 Inquiries Act, including the ability to compel the production of all relevant materials, and the inquiry will be a valuable opportunity for all of us. Of course, we expect that.
Thank you so much for giving way to me. I'm very grateful to the Minister. Can I just correct a couple of things that she has said? First of all, Operation Cygnus in 2016 and Operation Alice all identified shortages of PPE should there be a global pandemic. It was never a question of if, it was always a question of when. So that's one point. And secondly, in terms of the procurement disaster, please don't forget that the government was found to have acted unlawfully in the publication of their contracts, in the action that I took with the Good Law Project and on other honourable members as well.
Minister. I think the honourable gentleman as well, I said I'd give way to.
That's very kind. I thank the honourable lady for that. I've got a lot of time for her, as other members on this side have as well. Like her, I was a professional in procurement. I would not have been allowing this sort of behaviour in the organisation that I used to work for, and I'm sure she would not have. The actions of Lord Bethell in particular. This is a systemic problem in government. A department I was dealing with, totally unrelated to the pandemic, I won't say who the minister was, insisted on a meeting without any other representation and then insisted on texting me the information. There is a problem at the heart of government, and I think the minister should be aware of that.
Minister. I'm very grateful for the interventions. Just to be clear, yes, we are both fellow procurement professionals from the same industry indeed. The procurement professionals, like us, also feel very strongly that they would not have behaved in anything but the highest standards. They're highly commercial, they're highly regulated, they're highly professional. And they are the people responsible for the contracts. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, in closing today, I thank colleagues for their contributions. For their last contributions, I thank the honourable gentleman.
The minister's being very generous with her time. She has listed in great vigour, Madam Deputy Speaker, all the things the government have done to try and be transparent, all the things they will do to try and be transparent. So can she confirm to the House which way the government will be voting this evening on our motion?
I think the honourable gentleman may have missed when I said we were abstaining on the vote today. So, you know, this is an important debate, and I do take this very seriously. I'm a professional of 30 years before coming here, and my professional reputation is important to me, and I do make sure that we uphold the highest standards of professionalism. But make no mistake, it is an important one. It is important for me. This is important to get right. There are facts here, and I have set out the facts correctly. We don't want to play political games, gimmicks. This is not the right time to do that. They may well play well with your audience on your social media channels, but it is not the right approach.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has made it clear that the Government is not going to oppose this motion, so we might reasonably expect it to pass. She said on a number of occasions now that she will revert to the House with regard to the question of scope. The question of scope is actually very detailed in the terms of this motion, which we would anticipate will then be an instruction to the government. Can the Minister give an indication of what material her department might hold, or any government department might hold, which would not be disclosed under the terms of this motion?
Clearly, we will set out the scope and we will set out the documents. But in the spirit of openness and understanding of how we as a country can rise to meet the challenges of the future, we need to work with people who help make the difference. This was a very important process. We vaccinated and tested millions. We should be proud of that. We have built from virtually nothing the largest testing centre in Europe. We should be proud of that. Tens of thousands of people are alive today who otherwise may not have been. And this government has moved heaven and earth to get things done. So while we continue to approach this serious subject with a willingness to learn, we must also do so with pride for what has been delivered. Pride that when we were needed, we stepped up for our nation when it needed it most.
Brendan O'Hara.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and it may have not been a particular pleasure for the Minister, but it is indeed a pleasure to follow the Minister and her valiant attempt at defending the indefensible. Her efforts may have been more credible if her colleagues had actually done more than abandon her to her fate. And even when the emergency bat signal went out from the Whip's office, it seems this paltry crew is all that could be assembled to support her. And it very much looks from this side as if it is an admission of guilt by the Conservative Party. Because I was looking forward to hearing the stout defence of their government, and I can only assume, therefore, that that stout defence doesn't actually exist. So may I begin by thanking and congratulating the Right Honourable Member for Ashton-under-Lyne for the way that she introduced the motion, and let me put on record our full support for it, because there has to be full transparency about exactly what went on between Owen Paterson, when he was a member of this House, representatives of Randox, Lord Bethell, government ministers or former government ministers, their special advisers and their officials. And that full transparency has to include all electronic communications, as well as notes and minutes of meetings between all or some of those parties in relation to the awarding of hundreds of millions of pounds of contacts to Randox laboratories. Yes, I shall.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman. I did try to intervene on the minister, but she didn't give way. And it goes to this issue about Lord Bethell. It's not just about his mobile phone. There was a period between the 1st and the 6th of April 2020, and during that week he held several meetings with companies that went on to win millions of pounds worth of contracts from the government for COVID, and they weren't even in his diary, let alone minuted.
Absolutely take on board what the honourable gentleman says, and I'm sure the government have heard it as well. There are many, many, many questions to be answered, including from Lord Bethell himself. But it's essential that this is done, because there's a stench of corruption that is engulfing this government, who now stand accused of making certain well-placed individuals fabulously wealthy during this pandemic, not because of their particular skill or acumen in business, but primarily because of their political connections to the Conservative Party. And we should give thanks to Owen Paterson, because it was his behaviour and the bizarre attempt by the Prime Minister, the Tory Chief Whip and the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, albeit at the expense of the reputation of this House and all of us who sit in it, that's finally blown the lid off this scandal once and for all. Because it was almost exactly a year ago the National Audit Office revealed that those companies with the right political connections and who wanted to supply the UK with personal protective equipment had been directed into this high-priority channel purely on the recommendation of a government minister, an MP, a member of the House of Lords or a senior government official.
Would the member give way?
Yes, I shall.
Oh, I don't know. Out of the 78 contracts awarded to Scottish firms for PPE, 29 of them were new contracts. That's £100 million worth of PPE, and didn't have any emphasis before. So 29 companies got contracts worth £100 million in Scotland with no background in PPE. So I'm confused. What's the difference happening in the UK? At least Randox has the experience in things. I'm a bit confused. Sorry.
The difference, quite simply, is that we never fast-tracked our pals. We never operated a get-rich-quick scheme for our pals, and we didn't stuff elected second chambers full of people who bankrolled our party. That's the difference. I shall give way.
Thank the member for giving way, and I represent a constituency where Randox headquarters is in South Antrim. They're a major employer. There are not that many firms or pharmaceutical companies in the United Kingdom who would have the capacity to be able to deliver the amounts of tests that needed to be done at that time.
He makes an important point, but what has to be remembered that nobody is above scrutiny, and if there is nothing to hide, they should have nothing to fear. And this is all about scrutiny and shining a light where I fear a lot of people on the opposite benches do not want a light to be shown. Because, no, I won't, I'll move on, because that high priority channel, these companies were 10 times more likely to be successful than those from companies that did not have links to politicians or senior government officials, and who by definition therefore were low priority. And in and of itself, the existence of this high priority channel is quite remarkable. But the fact that, according to the National Audit Office, these companies referred to this route were considered by the cross-government PPE team to be somehow more credible and therefore to be treated with more urgency makes this particularly sinister. So it turns out that there were no written rules as to how this priority channel should operate, meaning that those companies who have given political support and had access to hundreds of millions of pounds of public funds were not subject to the usual rules of procurement and could bypass the essential paperwork that would be a prerequisite for safeguarding against misuse of public funds, and not even to go through the usual anti-corruption. It was, as I said, it seems little more than a get-rich-quick scheme for the Conservatives and their pals. I shall.
Giving way. Beyond being a get-rich-quick scheme, does he share my concern, which is that there are longer-term implications of this, which are around data? And a lot of this, the testing being done by Randox, where that data goes. When I completed a Randox test the other day, I noticed that it doesn't seem to actually fit with the NHS, and there's no seemingly data share from the Randox test to the NHS. Does he know more about that?
Unfortunately, I do not know more about it, and I thank the honourable gentleman for highlighting it. And I think it's something in the era in which we live is a very, very important point. Because what we're seeing now is crony capitalism at its worst. It stinks, and the closer we get to it, the more it reeks. I have in the past called for a full and independent investigation into this scandal, and I repeat that call again this afternoon. And I believe the actions of the disgraced member or former member for North Shropshire strengthen that case further. Because, as the honourable member for Ashton-under-Lyme said, there are very, very serious questions that need answered. And if they're not answered, then the reputation of this government, who seem to be stumbling from one crisis and scandal to another, will be further damaged, but so too will the reputation of this place, the people in it, and politics generally. And I understand that the government are desperate for this to go away, but it's not going to go away until these incredibly serious issues are addressed. And I suspect that the government know that, and that they understand that this place being full of large carpets, there probably isn't one large enough for them to sweep this under. So it's not going to go away, and it has to be addressed. Now, we know, Madam Deputy Speaker, that between November 2016 and July 2018, Owen Paterson lobbied officials on behalf of Randox, and they paid him £100,000 a year to act as their advisor. We also know that in March 2020, Randox Laboratories were awarded a no-bid government contract worth £133 million. And despite being fast-tracked and essentially handed this multi-million-pound contract, it also appears that Randox weren't actually equipped to perform the task it had been given a shed load of public money to do. As the Times reported last week, just days after being given the contract, the company informed officials that they would struggle to carry out enough COVID tests without government help, and resulted in the government sending the army in to help them. In an internal memo seen by the Times, a government official wrote that the company was, quote, nervous about having sufficient systems, and that the army was on its way to Glasgow to pick up 2 machines which were urgently needed for testing. I'll come to the moment in a moment. The moment, that's a very good idea, perhaps the gentleman would like to make a speech. The memo that's seen by the Times also states that the company feared that it didn't have enough extraction systems and was hoping that yourselves, brackets, the government, could help us access extraction systems from universities, hospitals and anywhere we can get our hands on. Crucially, the Times further reported that this memo was written by an official in the Department of Health and Social Care after a phone call on April the 9th between Lord Bethell, the Conservative Minister responsible for awarding testing contracts at the time, and Owen Paterson, the Conservative MP who has been handsomely paid by Randox to lobby on their behalf. So it appears that the company employing a Conservative MP who were fast-tracked and awarded a no-bid contract worth £133 million were actually ill-equipped to provide the vital service that they promised to deliver. Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said, this absolutely stinks. And unless and until every record of what was communicated between Mr Paterson, Lord Bethell, Randox, government officials, special advisers is made public, the stench of corruption will only increase. Of course.
Make sure that you're very clear that the contract is published. The contract date is the 30th of March. The meeting you referred to is the 9th of April. So the contract was actually let and has been published before that meeting. Thank you.
I thank the Minister for intervention, and therefore the Minister should have absolutely no fears whatsoever in making full disclosure, because that's what this motion asks the government to do. And it's not about selective disclosure, it has to be full disclosure, and everything that is said and done between the parties that we've mentioned has to be put in front of this House and has to be open for scrutiny. But of course, the sending in of the army to help Randox wasn't the only error or the only controversy in that year. You know, in August of 2020, you know, the UK's medicines regulator had to ask Randox to recall 750,000 unused corona testing kits. You know, after concerns were raised about safety. So by any standards, Randox hadn't exactly covered themselves in glory in the first few months of their contract. So it really does raise a question as to how, 6 months later, they managed to secure another government contract, this time worth £347 million, taking their total contract to £500 million in 6 months. I mean, it really has been a bit of a Klondike gold rush for the Northern Ireland-based company who employed a former Secretary of State for Northern Ireland to lobby the government on their behalf. And as I've said, and I'll say again to the honourable gentleman who is no longer in this place, that everything could be above board. Everybody could be beyond reproach in this, but we deserve to know. And ironically, Mr Paterson was appointed as Secretary of State for Northern Ireland in 2010 by the then Prime Minister David Cameron, who just months before becoming Prime Minister said, "I believe that secret corporate lobbying goes to the heart of why people are so fed up with politics. It arouses people's worst fears and suspicions about how our political system works, with money buying power, power fishing for money, and a cosy club at the top making decisions in their own interests. It's an issue that's tainted our politics for too long. It's an issue that exposes the far too cosy relationship between politics, government, business and money." And then Mr Cameron, in the same speech, said, "If we win the election, we will take a lead on this issue by making sure that ex-ministers are not allowed to use their contracts and knowledge gained while being paid by the public to serve the public for their own private gain." We can't go on like this, he said. It's time we shone a light on lobbying in our country and forced our politics to come clean about who is buying power and influence. As we'd say in Glasgow, Aye, right, so you will. And of course today, David Cameron, that self-styled great reformer, thanks to the Greensill scandal, is up to his neck in the same cronyism, corruption and sleaze that he promised to call out and eradicate when he was in opposition. If it wasn't so sad, it would be funny. Madam Deputy Speaker, while many of us very much welcome that Mr Paterson is no longer a member of this House, the mess that he left behind needs clearing up. And until it is cleared up, the widespread belief that politics in this country is corrupt and that this government is corrupt will not go away. And it's a perception not helped, I have to say, by the Prime Minister himself deciding to go to Glasgow and stand in front of a hall full of world leaders and feeling the need to declare that the United Kingdom is not a corrupt country. Well, Prime Minister, here's your chance to do something about it. And you can make a start by allowing full transparency about exactly what went on between Owen Paterson when he was a member of this House and Randox Laboratories and Lord Bethell and government ministers past and present and their special advisers. Should he refuse to do that, Madam Deputy Speaker, then I think his performance in Glasgow last week will be seen as one of a Prime Minister who protests too much.
Nigel Mills.
I wasn't planning on speaking in this debate, but I have a few remarks I would like to make. I just say, as one of the co-chairs of the all-party parliamentary group on anti-corruption, I take these kind of accusations very seriously, and somebody who's served on the Public Accounts Committee, I've done my fair share of time looking at how government procurement works. So I think there are some very serious questions that need very serious and comprehensive answers. But I also think we have to be pretty generous in spirit to the situation the government found themselves in back in March 2020, when we had a pandemic on a new virus. We didn't have anything like the testing capacity, we didn't have anything like the PPE in stock that we needed, and we had to try and find solutions to those things in a quick way. I just don't think it would have been feasible in that situation for every normal process to have been carried out and to have delivered what people had every right to expect the government were trying to deliver. So we should look at this generously and not expect to see every I dotted and every T crossed that we would normally have expected. That doesn't mean to say we should expect there to be no process at all, and the government should have been cognizant that if they were going through a rapid emergency process, that there were very great risks with that process, that things could go wrong, that money could be wasted, that amounts could be overpaid, we could buy from people who couldn't deliver, and we wouldn't end up with the right amount of stuff. And actually that should heighten the risk and just have actually then created some more sensitivity around process to make sure that those sort of things couldn't be accused retrospectively. And then what we should have seen was the government try to be as transparent as they possibly could about what happened, about what was bought, about what was paid, about who introduced who and how. And I think that's where the government have gone wrong at the end of this process. I can accept that mistakes were bound to be made at the start. I can probably accept that we probably wasted money, we paid too much, we paid the wrong people, things went wrong. I can even expect, I can understand that in the middle of this panic, if I knew somebody who I could trust, who I thought could deliver, I may well have pushed them forward more than I would ever normally. I can accept all that may have happened. But what I think we need to do now, we're now 18 months on from that point, is let's publish everything we feasibly can. Let's be as clear as we possibly can what happened and why. I suspect, actually, there's not much to see here. I suspect we'll find things that are embarrassing, things that went wrong, but I don't think we'll find much evidence of corruption. But if there is any, let's get it out there, let's see it, let's deal with people who did that, let's get the punishments, and then let's move on from this.
try to play the situation with a degree of integrity. The problem for us all is it simply isn't obvious whether that level of integrity has been followed all the way through. Corruption does matter. The Prime Minister was very interesting at question time today because he used a defence when he told the House and through the House the country that we should not be talking about corruption because that let our nation down vis-a-vis the rest of the world. The Prime Minister is absolutely wrong. When there is the whiff of corruption, it's vital that we talk about it. It's vital that we're seen to be working to uncover it. And that is the problem that we face, is that I have no confidence, this House has no confidence, even the benches opposite, the government benches, backbenchers are not here in any numbers because many Conservative backbenchers were not in for the opening speeches, these benches were full, not in for the opening speeches because many Conservative backbenchers themselves are concerned about this whiff of corruption. The honourable member may want to give way, may want me to give way, rather than chunnering away from a sedentary position. I'm sure it's very interesting what he was saying, Madam Deputy Speaker, but it was inaudible. It was inaudible and therefore irrelevant. But
I'm just surprised that in an Opposition Day debate where so many people clearly claim they want to discuss the issue, the benches are empty on the other side. It's your debate. Where maybe you'd explain where your benches are as well, because I'm intrigued. Your side called it. Do they really care?
Order, order. Now that the honourable gentleman has properly intervened and addressed the House, not from a sedentary position, I can officially hear him. And I will just make clear that he shouldn't say you. The substance of what he says is not a matter for me. He shouldn't say you. Now, we've had quite a lot of that today, including during Prime Minister's questions. Just don't do it. Let's try to keep to the rules. Tony Lloyd.
Right, Madam Deputy Speaker. In fact, had you not said that, I would have defended you that it certainly was not your debate. It's, except as far as it does belong to the House and importantly to the country, because that's what matters in this issue. It matters that the public has an opportunity to know what went on during this whole saga. I just want to talk briefly about the VIP fast-track situation. In November of last year, I approached the health ministers about a constituent company, Brooks & Jones, who are a printing company and printed extensively for the National Health Service. This was at the same time as the VIP fast-track structure was going on. So good was the VIP fast-track structure for me as an opposition member of Parliament, it took me until, I think, July of this year to get a proper response, and only when I insisted on meeting with the Minister. Now, I'll give credit to the Minister. Once this was brought firmly, as I'd done many times, to his attention, I got the answer I didn't want. The company that my constituent company, didn't see any joy from that exchange. But what a world of difference between companies who can talk to ministers and can be put on a VIP fast track and can get the opportunity of being awarded contracts, whether with or without proper surveillance by those so it's in charge. In the case of my company, no such consideration. Now, the Minister actually has got to take that on board, because actually procurement does matter, but the opportunity for people to engage in the procurement process matters, because there are many ways of tilting the weighing scales of life. One of them is simply not to allow people to even to be in the bidding process, and that does matter, and that is the difference between those on the VIP structure and those like Brooks & Jones and my constituent Ronnie Blair, who wasn't even allowed to get into the starting blocks, because that does matter, because that actually is a low level of corruption as well. Now, Ronnie Blair, Managing Director of Brooks & Jones, offered me no money. I wouldn't have taken any money anyway. Maybe that's where it goes wrong. If there's not money changing hands, maybe it's not, doesn't oil the wheels of procurement. But that is an outrageous thing for me to say, and would be much worse were it true. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, it is true, because we know that Owen Paterson was paid. We know Owen Paterson broke the lobbying rules. We know that Owen Paterson got access to ministers, and in getting that access to ministers, we then don't know what difference that made, because that is the missing link in this whole sad jigsaw. There are so many things we don't know. Yes, I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister has moved now a long way on this issue. I welcome the fact that the Prime Minister 2 weeks ago was trying to cover up this scandal, this saga of corruption, is now in favour of openness. That's good. When the Minister told us earlier on that the government wouldn't vote tonight against the opposition motion, that again is genuine progress. But you are, not you, Madam Speaker, the government are in the slow learners lane on this. The public wants to see real alacrity, a real commitment and a belief that things are going to be sorted out, because we've got to get to the bottom of this. And the issue of the noble Lord Bethel is now central, because what we do know is that Randox were awarded huge sums of public money, £500 million of public money, enormous amount of money. That may or may not be legitimate vis-à-vis the crisis we faced. We do know that they failed in the case of $750,000 of tests to be able to deliver a product that actually worked. Now that is enormously important, and it's enormously important to know why, after that experience, we then saw another contract being awarded to this same company, a company that couldn't do the work, and that matters. And the public needs to have reassurance that was not as a result of the weighing scales of life being altered in Randox's favour unfairly, because in the end we're not talking about something trivial, we're talking about public safety, and actually in the case of COVID, public life and death. The wrong tests could give a result that led to people dying. So again, this is not a trivial matter that we simply sweep under the carpet, as other honourable members have said, but the position of the noble Lord Bethel is fundamental on this. The Minister told me before that she didn't know whether his phone calls were minuted by departmental officials. If they weren't, that is outrageous. There's no excuse of being a crisis. There's no crisis in the Minister's office. There's no crisis that a civil servant couldn't be there on that phone call, because that simply is the way things ought to have been done. We need to know whether those calls were minuted, because if any call wasn't minuted, there is a real problem. We don't know which calls we don't even know about that the noble Lord Bethel engaged in, and that matters, because maybe some of the things we'll never know with a noble lord who is so, shall we say, casual in his acquaintanceship with his telephone. And that really does matter, because whilst I'm grateful that my honourable friends laughed, actually, and it would be funny if it weren't so serious. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, the question that the noble Lord Bethel has got to answer are the ones that this government has got to answer. And it's good that the Minister tells us, and I welcome what she said, that that she is committed to making sure that the scope is properly identified. Actually, the motion before us defines the scope. But nevertheless, the commitment that the government will honour that scope is fundamental. And if it's not discharged, that would be outrageous. I will say to her, probably not her decisions if it's not honoured. But I do hope she will take the message back that her reputation is sullied if others refuse to allow this investigatory process to be complete. But in the end, we have got to know what took place. And we've got to know, because the only way we can give the public the confidence in our public life, in politicians, in the public procurement, is if they have the guarantee that when things go right, they can know it really has gone right. And when it goes wrong, we dig and dig until we can see what went wrong, to ensure that those responsible are no longer in that position, and that it can never, as far as we can prevent it, happen again. This situation does matter because it is about public money, enormous amounts of public money, but in the end, this is about the public well-being, life and death. I suffered from COVID. I was in hospital with COVID. I saw doctors, nurses, hospital staff of all kinds coming forward at a time when I'd got COVID, taking the risk that I would give that to them without proper PPE at that time. Now, that was early in the whole process, and we may or may not come to the conclusion that that was a risk that was unavoidable. I'm very grateful to those people who treated me and saved my life. But what I am determined is that nobody else should have lost their life because of a dodgy procurement contract. And that's why this matters. We've got to know. Thank you.
Kate Holler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And just to echo from the last speaker, this does matter because Blackburn was hit harder than most areas. So I took a very keen interest in what the government was doing to help ease the situation. In June 2020, I raised with the then Secretary of State for Health my concerns over Randox tests. We had care homes who were trying to apply the test. The swabs were snapping and there was a danger it could go down an old person's throat. We found that residents were developing blisters within their mouths. So the member for the Amber Valley made a statement that was very similar to a statement the Secretary of State for Health at that time says to me, nothing to see here, it's fine, there's not a problem with these tests, we're satisfied they meet health and safety standards. 2 weeks later, when we tried to get tests to replace the banned tests, we were told the care homes couldn't have them because there was none available until September. Now, that was absolutely disgraceful. It had a huge impact on elderly, vulnerable people, and it had a huge financial and emotional impact on providers of care within our communities. The Secretary of State in July had to admit that these 750 tests had to be withdrawn. Now, we're here to talk about contracts and the allocation of contracts, and unlike the two members who are here, I'm not an expert in procurement. But when there's a statement that says there have been serious shortcomings with these contracts, documents show that ahead of the 9th of April call, and the contracts, by my understanding, was actually awarded on the 18th of May, not in March, as the Minister suggested. Department of Health civil servants were trying to compensate for shortfalls in Randox equipment. A clause in the contract said the government would help them source equipment if they're short or struggling to get it. Civil servants confirmed Randox did need additional equipment for various loans of things that they needed. This was escalated to number 10, and they were told they would have to send letters to universities to assist with the shortfall in the equipment. The UK government had to pay airlines to fly used test kits from England to Northern Ireland so that Randox could analyse them in the laboratory. Now, if that doesn't say alarm bells ringing, saying there's something wrong with the tests, why did we award the contract for 133 million? Why did the then Secretary of State say nothing to see here, move on, only for 2 weeks later to admit there was a fault? And that's bad. And I do recognise the urgency of getting test kits in. So you would excuse some mistakes in the first 3 months to then award another contract 6 months later when there were still problems is outright disgraceful. It was putting lives in Blackburn and businesses in Blackburn at risk. The Minister spoke about the National Audit Office, and according to the National Audit Office investigation, government procurement during the COVID-19 pandemic highlighted how there were failings to document how risks were considered and were to be managed. Where there was no competition, failings to justify why particular suppliers were chosen or how potential conflicts of interest have been identified and managed. So what does that say about the objectivity of the ministers taking decisions fairly and on merit or openness? That decision would be taken in an open and transparent manner or even accountability. That ministers would submit themselves to the scrutiny of this House, not just to ensure that they were held accountable, but the people we are here in this House serve get the best service they deserve. We've learnt the last 20 months that these things cost lives. Madam Deputy Speaker, if the Government wants to move forward from this shameful episode and wants indeed to strengthen not just the standards that we have in this House, but the fact that we must abide by, but the standard of public service, our constituents deserve better. Blackburn has been devastated by this pandemic, and failings from test to test and trace has cost financially, emotionally and lives. And this Government must be held to account. It must accept the mistakes, it must publish the detail in order to learn from those mistakes, and it must take action to make sure that these mistakes are never allowed to happen again. I feel exceptionally sorry for the Minister opposite. She's been asked to come here and defend the indefensible. Yeah. I've been battling with the Department of Health since the start of the pandemic. I have never had adequate responses to letters. It's always been, it's an emergency, we'll get back to you. I asked the Secretary of State about £133 million and how much would be recouped from that failed contract. I'm yet to receive a response. I don't know if the Minister's aware, but Blackburn's got a serious shortage of GPs, and some of that £133 million, if she would just pay attention, it would be good, wouldn't it? If the Minister opposite would commit to investigating completely, and she can use Blackburn as an example of the failings, and commit to make sure she does everything possible to level up some of the unequalness that she's created right across East Lancashire, I'll be more than happy, but it is important. Lessons are learned and actions are taken.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm grateful to you for the opportunity to take part in what has been, I think, quite one of the most remarkable debates that I have seen since I became a Member of Parliament in 2001. The Honourable Gentleman from Amber Valley, who's just removed himself from the chamber, said he suspects that there is not much to see here. I suspect he's probably right about that. But when you hear the concession from the Minister at the dispatch box, that there was no record taken of the telephone conference call involving Lord Bethell and Owen Paterson, when you hear the somewhat improbable history outlined by the Honourable Lady from Ashton-under-Lyne about the relationship between Lord Bethell and his various mobile phones, then suspicious minds like mine, and probably even worse, will ask why it would be that there's nothing much here to see. Happily give way to the Minister.
I just want to make it clear what I said. We have been unable to locate a formal note of the meeting. That's what I've been told so far. That doesn't mean there isn't one. It's been unable to locate one. But of course, everything we have will be put in the library.
Yes, I think that is indeed an important distinction. I wonder if the search for these minutes has actually extended as far as the shredding room. And what I would say to the Minister, or perhaps to her colleague when it comes to winding up, it would be helpful for the House today if we could be told how many other documents there might be within the purview of the specification that's in this motion here tonight that are similarly difficult to locate. And I would just caution the Treasury bench that this question of not being able to find documents and text messages or WhatsApp messages on ministers' phones and the rest of it only lasts for so long, and as a defence that is, and that there is a full inquiry coming, and that the longer defences are thrown up that are somewhat less than substantial, the more dust is kicked up, then the worse it is for government ministers at the end of the day. So if the information is there within the knowledge and control of the government department, or any department, then it should be disclosed under the terms of this motion, which we're apparently going to face today. I'll just, in 2 seconds, because the Minister said a number of times, and said again when I challenged her in relation to the question of scope, that the government would define the scope. With respect to the Minister, the government will not define the scope. The House defines the scope. The scope has been very clearly laid out in the motion that is before the House today. And I don't see what justification there would be, given the fairly careful construction of the motion today, what the possible excuse there would be for not disclosing information. But actually, more importantly even than that, even if there is some tiny loophole somewhere, it's a question about doing the right thing and being seen to honour not just the letter of the motion that the House will pass later on today, the spirit. And that's why, to quote again David Cameron, disinfectant is sunlight is the best disinfectant, and we need to have the fullest possible disclosure.
On that, yeah. That's actually a very convenient way for the Honourable Member to give way, because, of course, that's the point I wanted to put to him, is that what does the public believe if there are documents missing? What does the public believe if ministerial meetings, which are always minuted, as the Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland knows, always minuted, what do the public believe if they find that that was not minuted? Even if it turns out that in reality, in God's time, we find out nothing bad happened, actually the public will rightly still have the belief that somebody is trying to pull the wool over their eyes, and that simply is part of the distrust in politicians, in government, that we've got to clear and make sure we can re-establish our reputation.
Well, one can only imagine what the public might believe in these circumstances, and I fear it may not be generous. And actually, you know what, it doesn't just reflect badly on the government, it reflects badly on all of us who are in public life, and that's why the way in which the government approaches this whole matter, and has approached it since the dreadful vote 2 weeks ago on Thursday, has done so much damage to the standing of public life. But actually, I do know a little bit about this because I spent the early years of my legal practice as a member of the civil service. I did my traineeship as a Procurator Fiscal Deputy at Crown Office. And this was back in the dark days of the 1990s. And we kept everything. We minuted everything. And when we had finished the meeting, or whatever it was going to be, we filed it. And that was pieces of paper which were then sitting in filing cabinets and archives for 30 years or however long it was going to be, at which point it would be taken out and it would be put into the public domain. What that process of preparing files for publication taught me was that not everybody in the public service was always very careful at the way in which they filed pieces of paper. And anybody who's ever been in legal practice will know that occasionally papers for one client get mixed with the papers of another. But that, as I say, was back in the dark ages. And the notes that are prepared these days, I suspect, are not handwritten in fountain pens and little pieces of paper. There will be electronic records of them. And these electronic records are virtually impossible to destroy. So that's why the question of documents being difficult to find, I think it does stretch, in my mind, a degree of credulity. As I say, I think we've all got respect for the Minister. I noticed when she started her speech, there were 2 ministers on the bench, 2 PPS as a whip, and the Honourable Member from Amber Valley. As I say, I've never seen the House so poorly populated for a debate like this. Indeed, I've got to say I've never even seen the civil service box as thinly populated as it is today. And that in itself is quite telling, because it comes back to the way in which the government approaches this. And the most powerful people in any parliament are always government backbenchers, because they are the people who have the opportunity to defeat the government. Everybody who's ever served in a whip's office knows that. So it's not just that it's not just welcome, or it is welcome that the government won't contest this motion tonight, but it does worry me still that there is a lack of enthusiasm on that side of the House for extracting the maximum possible disclosure in relation to what we have heard. Now, the Minister, in the course of her speech, outlined quite properly and quite legitimately the various significant achievements, including the vaccine rollout. She reminded us of the situation which we found ourselves in March 2020, when we didn't really know what the future was going to hold. And as the Honourable Member for Amber Valley said, we wouldn't have expected every I to be dotted and T to be crossed. But at that point, we all gave a significant amount of power to government. We passed the Coronavirus Act in this House, which gives massive amounts of latitude to the government, because we all felt it was necessary to give them the powers to do what was going to be necessary in a situation where nobody knew what the future was going to hold. But what I fear has not been properly understood was that we gave the government with these powers a responsibility. They seem to have seen it, and many of those around government seem to have seen it not so much as a responsibility, but as an opportunity for enrichment. And I would say to the Minister and to all her colleagues that, in fact, that attitude is at the heart of the problem here, and it is one which is essentially an abuse of the powers that we gave them in March 2019 when we passed that emergency legislation, and that is why the motion that has come before the House today is so important. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think, like every member in this House, I frequently sit down with businesses in my constituency, and I will help them with getting rid of penalties if we possibly can, maybe for late return for VAT, farmers who will be penalised in a quite draconian manner because they've had a very minor and unintentional error in the submission of agricultural support payment claims. Sometimes we're able to help them, sometimes we have to just shrug our shoulders after we've tried and say, I'm really sorry, I tried, but these are the rules. For these constituents, they will only ever listen to me deliver that message to them again if they can be satisfied that the rules that so adversely affect them apply to everybody else. And the real damage that the government seeks to do in the way that it has handled these matters is that they will never again be able to tell other people that they should not be held to the same standard. Thank you.
Owen Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I'm not intending to detain the House for too long this afternoon, and I think many of the main issues at focus here have been discussed. But when you look at the state that this government's got itself into, you could be forgiven for thinking that we are somewhere towards a descent into a cacostrophe, if I could even say it, because it's a government of the least able, the very worst that a society has to offer. And if those in power abuse that power for private and personal gain, if that's not the worst in society, then I don't know what is. So let's remind ourselves of the content of the misconduct, because we've seen parts of it before: lobbying for awarding of contracts through the exclusive VIP channel without competition or transparency, a channel where 1 in 10 offers were successful compared to just 0.7% through normal channels. It's the same process that locked out tens of thousands of experienced suppliers from the procurement process for life-saving equipment in favour of the likes of jewellery companies, vermin control companies, and then the then Health Secretary's pub landlord. I've lost count of how many times we've been here before, and what we're discussing today is one part of a bigger trend, a culture that doesn't see any value in transparency or openness. And I do, in a debate where many had hoped for, I think, greater transparency, I think we've actually seen a bit more muddying of the waters from the government benches. And I think it would be worth saying, and you forgive me, Madam Deputy Speaker, for making a plug in it again, even though the time has passed for it, but if the government had actually supported my Ministerial Interests Emergency Powers Bill last year, we could have actually been in a much more open place today. Instead, the government's been dragged kicking and screaming to reveal what companies have benefited from this kind of corruption, because that's what it is at the bottom. From the 20.3 million going to Tim Horlick of Vyanda Capital to the 45.7 million going to Banksbourne of Tarna Pharma. Fat cats benefit from corruption, and it's transparency that stamps it out. Yes, please.
If he's using this definition of corruption, does that definition still apply to the £500 million worth of contracts which were given out by the SNP government in Scotland to companies without any competition? Because I'm confused, Madam Deputy Speaker. On one hand, the SNP government in Scotland is giving out £500 million worth of contracts without any competition. But on the other hand, it's the UK government doing something similar, and that's corrupt. You can't, either they're both corrupt or they're neither corrupt. I'm a bit confused. Are you?
I am eternally grateful to the honourable gentleman for that contribution, because I think, as when he tried to make exactly the same point before, I think it was pointed out to him that the key difference was that, yes, I mean, and the Minister herself said this, that in a global pandemic, steps need to be taken, and everybody has recognised that steps need to be taken that aren't necessarily in line with the normal process. But the key difference comes as the UK government employed a VIP lane open to government ministers, members of the government party, that wasn't open to anybody else, where contracts were handed out to personal contracts through WhatsApp exchanges and to paid lobbyists for companies. That is the key fundamental difference here, and I am so grateful that the honourable gentleman gave me a chance to again highlight that point.
You really do walk into these things.
It's very. If he wants to try again, I am more than happy to yet again. Okay. It's very easy to get wrapped up in the day-to-day melodrama of the saga, but it's important to take a step back to look at the bigger picture. The real scandal here isn't that a couple of bad eggs broke the rule. It's that the system either consistently enables rule breaking or completely lacks rules against this kind of behaviour. For instance, take the fact that the government was completely within its constitutional rights to retrospectively change the rules to let Owen Paterson off the hook. In what other system would that be acceptable? The system of government here works to enable corruption, not constrain it, precisely because it gives the government a blank cheque to make up the rules as they go along. The absence of a written constitution to constrain governments means that this can keep happening over and over again, as it has done through the 90s and the noughties. And if they don't like the rules that are currently there, they can just rip them up and put in new ones. So the problem here isn't bad eggs, it's the system. It's the fact that no UK government can ever be accountable to anything but itself. Parliamentary supremacy means that any government can override past decisions. They can rewrite the rules to their own liking. And it's no wonder Brexiteers obsessed over it in 2016, because it's what's given them the green light to conduct themselves in the ways that we're discussing today. The only thing that can ever constrain a government is political pressure, which thankfully in this situation has worked. But that's an awfully sugary peg to base your system of government on. For that reason, this isn't the first time that corruption has reared its ugly head in this place, and sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, I doubt it will be the last time either. The very way that this Parliament is set up lends itself to allowing this to happen. If we don't change it, nothing will change it. I'm under no illusion that this scandal will lead to some dramatic new system of government rising from the ashes like a phoenix. I can't see it. But that is on the table in Scotland. Independence does mean that we could have that written constitution that can guarantee in law that governments are held accountable and transparency can be guaranteed. Openness and transparency benefits all of us in this place. It's in all of our interests to make sure that that is at the top of the agenda. Our constituents demand that, and it should be our duty to make sure that they get that. Public servants should be here to represent their communities, not to line their pockets. And sadly, Madam Deputy Speaker, the lining of pockets has far too often recently been what's been on the table.
Don't butler.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think we all agree that the Minister today has been given a hard gig coming to the Chamber today, and I do hope that she won't allow the approach of the government to ruin her good reputation that goes before her. I just want to pick up on some of the points that the Minister mentioned in her contribution to the House today. The Minister spoke about the National Audit Office, Now, let me be clear about what the National Audit Office actually said. The National Audit Office said that not all the paperwork it needed was present to enable it to follow the trail of contracts that had been issued. That means that the National Audit Office didn't have the information that it needed to give a full and correct report. Let me give you an example of some of the companies that were given contracts. They say awarded, but really, Madam Deputy Speaker, there's no other competition. You're just given money, you're given it. You know, say you awarded it, but there's not a competition. So Top and Gurin was one of these companies. Now, this company worked for the Tory party during the 2019 general election, and it was found by an independent body that 88% of their adverts between the 1st and the 4th of December contained misleading information. Now, you would think that that would preclude a company from getting a contract, right? You would think that if a company has been led to have been found to have produced information that's 88% incorrect, misleading, that they wouldn't be seen anywhere near government. But no. Instead, they were awarded a £3 million contract. They attended meetings at number 10. And when I asked the Secretary of State about this at the Science and Technology Committee, he couldn't tell me what on earth they did. So for £3 million, they got the money, and then they got awarded another contract on top of that. The National Audit Office also said in their report that a company was put into the VIP lane by mistake. A company was put into the VIP lane, this magical VIP lane, by mistake. You would have thought that that mistake would have been found, but no. That company went on to get a £350 million contract, a company that was put into the VIP lane by mistake. This is why we need transparency, because at the end of the day, people outside of this place are asking questions about what's going on inside, and they don't understand it, I don't understand it, and there are people in the government that are trying to hide what's happening. There are civil servants that have been at their wits' end. They've whistle blown. They have said that they, and in the National Audit Office report, it also cites some civil servants who raised concerns all the way through the procurement process, asking why we were paying over the odds for PPE. Even at the higher rate of PPE, we were paying over the odds to that. There was question raised about a Samir Jassal, who was friends of the Home Secretary, who was acting as a middleman, who wrote emails to the then Secretary of State saying, "Hey Matt, you've been most helpful previously." Very, very familiar. Went on to get some money for a company, and that company went from being valued at £200 to £10 million. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are serious questions to answer. And as my honourable friend said earlier, we either have to clean up, or cover up. And I hope that this is the beginning of the process to clean up. And for those people that are saying, we have to learn the lessons, I agree. In the beginning, in January, there was a lot being thrown at us during the pandemic. But by September 2020, we knew better. And on the 17th of September 2020, I asked about Randox in the Science and Technology Committee, and I said, why we gave a £133 million testing contract unopposed to Randox when they disposed of over 12,000 used swabs in a single day. They voided more than 35,000 used test kits in a few months. And the company, not only did they do that, they had the cheek to charge us for it. So they threw away tests. They didn't do the test, they threw away some of the tests, and then they charged us for it. So we were still paying for all of their mistakes. How is that good business? Just basic, how is that good business? How is that good procurement? How is that a good contract? It just isn't. It's wrong, and it is, quite frankly, corrupt. And Baroness Harding said that she could not confirm nor deny. Again, that speaks volumes. Madam Deputy Speaker, Randox did employ the former MP Owen Paterson at over £500 an hour. When I asked Baroness Harding what he did, she said, "I'm afraid you'd have to ask Owen Paterson rather than me." Now, he wasn't going to tell me, she wasn't going to tell me, but I sure know that the government should be able to tell me, because at the end of the day, as we said earlier, as a former minister in government, every single meeting should be logged. There should be minutes of those meetings, and it should be made public. We are way down the road now, and this government was obsessed with centralisation as opposed to decentralisation. We knew very early on that a local approach was better, that a local approach was producing the results within the 24 hours that we needed in order to help us stem the pandemic, but yet still the government was obsessed with this centralised approach because they could hide behind the cloak of the pandemic. They could make sure that their mates got money and that the companies were given contracts that were not suitable to have. I had a company in my constituency, Medical Diagnosis Limited. You know, they weren't even given a look in to provide any of the services. We had local GPs, we had local pharmacies, all wanted to be involved, and they were not able to be involved because the government were obsessed with this centralised system where they can hide behind the cloak of the pandemic. I think the time for hiding, Madam Deputy Speaker, has come to an end.
Shadow Minister, Annalise Dodds.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is a vital moment for everyone who cares about democracy, about transparency, about stemming the waste and abuse of public money, and about improving the way our country responds to future crises. And I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, I find it extraordinary that on a matter of such national significance, there wasn't a single Conservative member on the list to speak during this debate. As my friend for Huddersfield damningly stated, this was the worst such situation he had seen since he came into Parliament in 1979, when I was at the very tender age of just 1 year old. Madam Deputy Speaker, let's recall the reasons why we are here today. Randox paid Owen Paterson over £8,000 a month to lobby on its behalf. Mr Paterson then sat in on a call between Randox and Lord Bethell, the Health Minister responsible for handing out government contracts. And Randox landed government contracts worth more than £500 million without any kind of proper tender process. No competition, just deals done behind closed doors. Discussions between a government minister, a Conservative MP and the company paying him handsomely to hawk its wares around the corridors of power. That tells you everything you need to know about how this Conservative government goes about its business. But the situation with Randox is even more disturbing because of what happened next, as set out very ably by my friend for Ashton-under-Lyne. After pocketing £133 million of public money to carry out COVID testing, Randox failed to deliver. So in the middle of an unprecedented national crisis, we witnessed an unedifying spectacle. The Health Secretary sending the begging bowl around our universities asking to borrow equipment, just so Randox could deliver what it promised. Now, I echo what so many on these benches have said. The Minister does have a very positive reputation on this side of the House, but my word, she's been given a hospital pass today, and I regret that the hole in which she was placed has become larger rather than smaller during this debate. She attempted, yes, I'm happy to give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. And just on the point of Randox that I neglected to mention, isn't it true that Randox failed every single target that it was set and yet still was awarded another contract 6 months later? It's unbelievable.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and many thanks also to my honourable friend. She is absolutely right that we have seen failure upon failure upon failure to meet the targets that were set. And of course, she knows that very well from her experience in this place and focus on health matters. And I find it quite extraordinary that the process of the Health Secretary having to call on others so that Randox could deliver what it had promised was described as an example of the triple helix. I remember those days. I remember them very, very well. I remember academics begging the government to come to them because they said they could deliver that testing that our country needed. And were they listened to? Well, we all know what happened. They weren't listened to. They were ignored when our country needed that testing. This wasn't an example of collaboration. This was an example of outsourcing that failed spectacularly on the Conservatives' watch. Happy to.
I'm grateful again, Madam Speaker. Madam Friend to make an excellent speech, but and one of the real questions around this is the Minister told us that those involved in procurement were not constrained whatsoever by government ministers' actions. I know not whether that's absolutely accurate or not, this we have to find out. But in any case, didn't the procurement process fail at precisely the point that there was no examination of Randox's capacity to deliver what they said they would? That is not clever procurement.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And of course, my honourable friend is absolutely right. He is right to point to the concrete impact of these failures, of that procurement system, matters that I will come to later in my remarks and matters which he detailed very, very ably in his important speech made just a few minutes ago. Now, again, the Minister maintained in her speech that all details of contracts, she stated, are published. Well, as my friend for Oldham East and Saddleworth set out earlier on today, the Conservative government was taken to court and it was found to have acted unlawfully because of its determination not to provide transparency over contracts. Again, a rewriting of history. And what else did we see at that time? We saw the Conservative government paying airlines to fly kits out to Randox's laboratory in Northern Ireland for them to be analysed. We saw the Health Secretary warning people not to use Randox testing kits because they were not up to standard, his words. And in the end, Randox had to recall 750,000 tests because they were not good enough, as my friend for Leicester South rightly explained. They threw away over 12,000 swabs in a single day because they had to be voided. Now, the Minister said earlier that we should pause and reflect on what happened. Well, many of us have been pausing and reflecting, and we've been remembering. We've been remembering what happened. Let's cast our minds back to that time, the beginning of the pandemic. We remember when our country faced that nationwide testing shortage as the devastation of COVID ripped through our communities. We remembered when people were scared, when they were sick, when they were dying. We remember when in Plymouth, people were told their nearest testing centre was in Inverness. We remember when in Bolton, at the epicentre of the pandemic, people couldn't access any testing at all. We remember, as my friend for Blackburn devastatingly set out earlier, we remember when care homes were not able to access the testing that they needed for elderly and vulnerable people, and we remember the impact that that had. The stakes could not have been higher. Lives depended on the government securing the best possible testing contract. Almost 40,000 people died in care homes in the year after Owen Paterson's phone call with Lord Bethel and Randox. Care homes which took in people from hospital who hadn't been tested at all. Care homes whose own staff and residents couldn't access the test they needed until nearly 2 months after the national lockdown began, by which point it was too late. And as my friend from Rochdale said, we have got to know whether this contracting played a role in those awful, awful outcomes. And how did the government respond to its abject failures to deliver? Did they learn the lessons when new contracts came up? For example, a contract twice as lucrative as the previous one for testing? Of course not. They doubled down, and Randox doubled up with a brand new deal. Again, no competition. Again, behind closed doors. Another £350 million of public money dropped in the lap of the firm, which just so happened to have a Conservative MP and former Secretary of State on its payroll. Now, the Minister attempted to dispute this course of events earlier. And I say to her, prove it. Publish every dot and comma related to these deals. Every email, every message, every letter between ministers, special advisers and MPs. Explain why Lord Bethel's WhatsApp messages have been lost as part of the sorry saga that was detailed by my friend for Ashton underline, the 21st century equivalent of the dog ate my homework. Come on, this is ridiculous. And explain to us, please, what on earth is going on with these minutes? What's going on with these minutes about the phone call with Lord Bethel and Paterson? Because we seem to have had mixed messages during this debate. You know, at one point, it seemed to be suggested that there weren't any minutes. They never existed. Now, that in and of itself raises extremely important questions. So no minutes of a meeting relating to 2 contracts worth £500 million of taxpayers' money? Then it was suggested, oh no, it's not that we necessarily know that there weren't any minutes, or maybe perhaps that they were destroyed. No, we were unable to locate those minutes. Well, when are they going to be located? They need to be located. And why, if the department's been unable to locate them, why has the Department of Health been stating that it's not able to respond in a timely manner to freedom of information requests about this, and not stated that was because it believes the minutes may not exist, or they're unable to locate them, or whatever it is. Instead, they just said they're trying to respond to those FOIs. My goodness, what a mess. Explain how many other meetings might not have been minuted. How many other meetings might have minutes actually in reality, but nobody knows where those minutes are? When are we going to see them? And explain why the government is so resistant to letting sunlight be the disinfectant that it needs to be on this process. As a member for Amber Valley said, just publish it. Because while we're talking today about this specific contract, we all know the problem doesn't begin and end with Randox. This is a government that rolled out the red carpet for many more companies with close links to senior Conservatives. Just yesterday, we learned that of the 47 firms which won contracts via the so-called VIP lane, which so many on these benches have referred to, 4 were helped by a former Conservative chair, 4 by the former Health Secretary, and 1 by Dominic Cummings. And I regret that the Conservative minister stated, her words, "Ministers have no role in the procurement process." Well, that wasn't the case, was it, with that VIP lane? No. We know that now, in black and white. She has the opportunity to intervene on me if ministers played no role in that VIP lane. No, she can't, because she knows that they were recommending those companies, including her Health Secretary. Go ahead.
I think the difference between the VIP lane is the identification of potential sources of supply. The procurement process then starts after that process, and that's when the procurement professionals, who are highly regulated, take over the process.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister is obviously doing her very best, but yet again, I'm afraid that this is not an edifying spectacle. That recommendation led, as I said before, in the overwhelming variety of cases, to those companies receiving enormously expensive contracts. It is risible to suggest anything less, and it's also risible to suggest that in these cases the government followed its own emergency procurement guidance. Let me quote that. Contracting authorities should maintain documentation on how they have considered and managed potential conflict of interest in the procurement process. I go on. Particular attention should be taken to ensure that decisions are being made on the basis of relevant considerations and, wait for it, not personal recommendations. And there was nothing inevitable about this, because I know how things ran in Labour-run Wales, and they did not run like this there. What we've seen in these situations are companies with links to the Conservative Party being 10 times more likely to secure a contract than others. Public money, which has been doled out based not on a company's abilities, but on its contact book. And when it comes to spending taxpayers' money on testing and PPE equipment that can save lives, you'd hope that this government would take things more seriously. But as my right honourable friend for Wallasey said, the switch into an emergency process provided no justification for the ransacking of public money that we've seen. As the member for Amber Valley said, an emergency situation wasn't a reason for having no process at all. In practice, as he said, there should have been more sensitivity around the process, not less. And because of the government's approach, British businesses that didn't have Tory MPs on speed dial missed out. Happy to.
To my honourable friend for giving way, I just wonder, I know the Minister's not managed to answer the question I posed to her earlier, but ARCO in the city of Hull existed for 135 years. It provided top quality products to the NHS since its very inception, and it couldn't get on to the VIP lane. Why were they blocked?
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And of course, my honourable friend is absolutely right. He detailed that very sorry tale in his speech in devastating manner, as indeed did also my honourable friend for Kingston upon Hull, West and Hessel. That company, ARCO, that had existed for decades, for 135 years, providing this kind of essential material, which was completely ignored. And yet we saw, for example, Ianda Capital, an investment firm with no PPE experience, which ended up being used by the government to purchase 50 million masks that weren't even usable. Again, we also saw other companies being missed out. Multi-Brands International, based in Bradford, it had been providing PPE to the Chinese government since the end of 2019. They spent months trying to offer those services to the UK government, but got absolutely nowhere. What did the government do instead? It bought 400,000 protective gowns from Turkey that were unusable. It seems to be always this way with the party opposite, Madam Deputy Speaker. One rule for the Conservatives and their friends, and another rule for everyone else. And it's the British people who pay the price. Now, Madam Deputy Speaker, this Conservative government is currently doing its best to suggest that every politician was engaged in graft. They're trying to drag everyone down to their level and feed a growing disillusionment with our politics that damages us all. But on the Labour benches, we know that is not true, and I suspect a fair few on their benches opposite also know it's not true. The people of Britain know when they're being taken for fools. When a party found guilty of breaking the rules tries to remake the rules to protect one of their own. There's a word for that: corruption, and that's what this Prime Minister has brought into the heart of our politics. And the British people won't tolerate it, which is why, of course, the Prime Minister panicked last week and U-turns, because he knew he'd been rumbled. We do all have to play by the same rules, whatever the Prime Minister thinks. That's why Labour is being clear that if we were in power, things would change. We would ban dodgy second jobs like those of the former member for North Shropshire. And I mean properly ban them, not the kind of watered-down cop-out that the Prime Minister is trying to lay down this afternoon. We'd close the revolving door and ban ministers from lobbying for at least 5 years after they leave office. We'd stop Conservative plans to allow foreign money to flow into our politics and ban the use of shell companies to hide the source of donations. We'd create a new office for value for money and reform procurement rules to put an end to the industrial scale wasting of public money. And we'd create a new, genuinely independent Integrity and Ethics Commission to restore the standards in public life that have been trashed by this government. This scandal has presented a clear choice about the kind of politics that we want for this country. Boris Johnson's politics of the gutter, or Keir Starmer's politics of decency and integrity. And the MPs on the benches opposite, they've got a choice today too. They can abstain under orders from the Prime Minister, their Chief Whip and the Leader of this House, or they can decide to make a stand. They can decide that they want to have a vote on this because they want to take a better path. And let's be very, very clear about the message that abstention is going to send, because we've heard weasel words, frankly, during this debate. And it appears clear that the scope of what government is proposing today, in terms of what it's willing to release, is far less than what Labour's motion requires. I see the Minister shaking her head. I sincerely hope that she's got that correct, because I have to say, listening to what she said and comparing it to what is written in the Labour motion, there seems to be far less this government is prepared to reveal. Go ahead.
Thank you very much. As I said, we would advise the scope, and as the Honourable Gentleman said, it could be discussed, but I haven't yet commented on the scope because I don't have the details of that.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I was really hoping that the Minister might say at this stage, yes, absolutely, we will follow what Labour has called for. We will make sure that those documents are published. We will make sure that the minutes of meetings are set out. Instead, she seemed to, I'm afraid, muddy the waters. I don't mean to be unfair to her, but that was what her response did for me just now. Very happy if she can clarify.
Yeah, I don't want to appear to muddy the waters because I haven't actually, said what the scope is. But what we said is we will publish the documents and we put them in the House Library. And the scope, I'm sure, will be, as broad as you would expect to satisfy the Honourable Lady.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Well, of course, the way to guarantee that the scope would indeed be of the breadth it needs to be would be, of course, to have that binding vote in the House of Commons that Labour is calling for right now. Because, of course, we have been here before. As the Minister is aware, we have been here before with promises being made about what this government will be transparent around and what it in practice is willing to deliver, which far too often is far, far less. We have got the chance now to move beyond that cover-up and instead have the clean-up that my friend for Ashton-under-Lyne referred to. We've got the chance to make amends. The government has the chance. It can also immediately accept all outstanding FOI requests in relation to all PPE and testing contracts. And it can publish all documents and correspondence related to the £3.5 billion of contracts that have gone to Tory donors and Tory-linked companies. Let's make that choice now. Let's clear it up once and for all.
Minister Maggie Throop.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I'm pleased to be able to close this debate today on behalf of the Government. As my colleague set out earlier, the Government is not intended to vote against this humble address. We will review what information we hold in scope and come back to Parliament and deposit it in the libraries of the House, in line with the Government's established stance on responding to humble addresses. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, I'm grateful we've had the opportunity to address the important issues raised today. Questions of how, as a country, we can rise and meet the challenges we face, of how we can ensure a system that's not only fast but fair, and how we can learn lessons from this most challenging period in our history. But one of the most important lessons I take from it, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that when we work together, we can do incredible things. We can build a testing capacity almost from scratch. We can reach millions of people in a single day. And we can save lives on a massive scale. Imagine what would have happened if we had not worked with so many incredible partners to deliver these efforts, because no one can do it on their own, especially in such unprecedented circumstances. So it's the duty of a responsible government to work with anyone who can. The NHS has been phenomenal, our hospitals have been phenomenal, local government has been phenomenal, but so too has the private sector. We couldn't have come this far without them. And looking at the situation today, Madam Deputy Speaker, it's easy to forget just how far we've come. Back in March 2020, we could process just a few thousand tests a day.